I know many of you use these videos to sleep. So before you drift off, like the video and subscribe. Now, let me tell you a story that might make you think twice about falling asleep too quickly. There's a certain allure that comes with the unknown. The chill of curiosity mixed with fear often drives us into places we'd never normally go. We see it in every old horror tale. Urban explorers entering abandoned buildings, ghost hunters chasing whispers of the past, and thrill seekers pushing the limits of their sanity. But rarely do we think about what happens when the unknown pushes back. Let me take you to the small, quiet town of Ashridge. Ashridge was the sort of place where nothing ever happened, nestled deep in the Midwest, surrounded by thick woods and forgotten highways. The town had seen better days. Half the buildings along Main Street were empty, boarded up after the last big employer left. There was a stillness that hung in the air, like the town was waiting for something, or maybe for someone to breathe life back into it. That stillness could fool anyone passing through into thinking this was just another sleepy American town. But the locals knew better. The Blackwell House had been the centerpiece of local lore for as long as anyone could remember. A towering relic of the past, it sat at the edge of town, hidden behind thick, gnarled trees and a rusting wrought-iron gate. The house hadn't seen a visitor in decades, and no one could quite recall the last time anyone lived there. Even so, it stood, decaying and waiting, casting a long shadow over the town's history. No one dared go near the Blackwell House. Not the older folks, who remembered the strange stories their grandparents told about it, and certainly not the younger generation, who had heard all too well about the house's eerie past. It was a rite of passage to hear the whispers, of people going missing, of strange noises at night, of things moving behind the cracked windows. Some said the house was cursed, others claimed it was haunted. But one thing everyone agreed on: no one who entered the Blackwell House came out the same. Enter our protagonists, 5 college students from the nearby university. You could probably already guess the type. Driven by adrenaline, emboldened by youthful invincibility, and possessed by a need to stand out in a world where everything is shared for views. For them, the Blackwell House wasn't just an old building, it was a chance to make a name for themselves. Jake, the self-appointed leader, was the one who came up with the idea. He had been to Ashridge before, passing through on a road trip with his family when he was younger. The town had stuck with him for reasons he couldn't explain. There was something about the stillness, the way the people there always seemed to be watching the road, waiting for something to arrive. When he heard the stories about the Blackwell House, it clicked. Guys, we have to do it. Think about it. Nobody's ever really explored the place right. Not properly, not with cameras and everything. We could make this huge. Jake's enthusiasm was infectious. His friends, Sam, Olivia, Aaron, and Bree, weren't hard to convince. They had all been searching for something to kickstart their fledgling YouTube channel, and the thought of a real haunted house exploration video seemed like the perfect idea. I mean, what's the worst that could happen? Sam had joked as they planned their trip. They set the date for late October, just before Halloween. The timing seemed perfect. The closer they got to Halloween, the more views they figured they'd pull in. They packed their gear, cameras, night vision, and plenty of snacks. Jake even brought a digital recorder, convinced that they'd pick up some EVP, electronic voice phenomena, if the house was really as haunted as everyone said. When they arrived in Ashridge that late afternoon, the sun was already dipping below the horizon. The trees cast long shadows across the empty streets as they drove through town. It looked even more lifeless than Jake remembered. Storefronts were shuttered, houses sat dark, and not a single person was out and about. "Is this place abandoned?" Bree asked from the back seat, peering out the window. Jake shook his head. "Nope. People live here. They just keep to themselves, I guess." It wasn't until they passed a dilapidated gas station that they saw any sign of life. An older man stood at one of the pumps, staring at them as they drove by. His eyes followed them, unblinking, until they rounded the corner and lost sight of him. "Well, that's not creepy at all," Olivia muttered, trying to break the tension that was already forming in the car. They drove through the rest of town in silence until the narrow road turned to gravel, and the trees thickened on either side. It wasn't long before they reached the Blackwell house. It was bigger than any of them had imagined. Even with the stories and photos they'd seen online, nothing prepared them for the sheer size of the place. The house loomed over them like a giant, its roof sagging in places, the windows dark and broken, the front porch half collapsed. Thick vines crawled up the walls, wrapping around the house like veins. The air around them seemed thicker, colder. "So, this is it," Jake said, trying to sound casual. He grabbed the camera from the back seat and started filming. "The famous Blackwell house. We're about to make history, guys." They unloaded the rest of their gear and made their way to the front gate, which was hanging off its hinges. The iron bars were rusted, and the ground was overgrown with weeds and thorns. As they pushed their way through, they could feel the weight of the house bearing down on them. "Man, I swear it's colder here," Aaron muttered, pulling his hoodie tighter around him. "I know, right? This place just gives me the creeps." Bree agreed, glancing nervously toward the house. Jake waved them off. "Come on, don't wimp out on me now. We've got this." They approached the front door, which was barely hanging onto its frame. It creaked open with a push, revealing the darkness inside. Jake went first, camera in hand, leading them into the house like a guide on a morbid tour. The air inside was even colder than outside, thick with dust and the scent of mildew. The walls were covered in peeling wallpaper, and the floors creaked with every step. But despite the decay, there was something about the house that felt alive. It was as if the walls were breathing, watching, waiting for something. "Okay, this place is officially creepy as hell," Sam said, his voice shaky. He scanned the hallway with his flashlight, casting long flickering shadows on the walls. Jake grinned. Exactly. Perfect. For the video. They explored the first floor, what was left of it anyway. The rooms were mostly empty, save for a few pieces of broken furniture, dusty curtains and piles of debris. The windows were all shattered, letting in thin beams of moonlight that did little to ease the growing tension. As they ventured deeper into the house, the temperature seemed to drop even more. Olivia shivered as they entered what looked like the dining room, the table long broken and collapsed under years of neglect. "Okay, I'm officially freezing," she said, rubbing her arms. "This is weird. There's no way it should be this cold in here." "Just think of it as part of the experience," Jake replied, always the optimist. But as they continued through the house, even Jake couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The deeper they went, the more oppressive the atmosphere became. It was as if the house itself was trying to suffocate them, its walls closing in, the darkness swallowing their flashlights whole. It wasn't until they found the basement door that things took a turn. The door was in the back of the house, hidden behind a collapsed bookcase. Unlike the rest of the house, the door seemed almost untouched by time. Its wood was dark, polished, and the handle gleamed in the dim light. "Guys, come check this out," Jake called, waving the camera toward the door. The others gathered around, staring at it. Something about the door felt wrong. It didn't belong. It was too new, too well preserved compared to the rest of the house. It was as if the house was hiding something, and this door was the key. "I don't like this," Bree said, taking a step back. "I've got a really bad feeling about this. We didn't come all this way to chicken out now," Jake replied, his voice firm. He reached for the handle and twisted. The door swung open with a low groan, revealing a narrow staircase leading down into darkness. The smell that wafted up from the basement was unbearable, damp, musty, and tinged with the unmistakable scent of rot. "Nope, nope, nope, nope," Aaron muttered, shaking his head. "I'm not going down there." Jake, of course, was undeterred. He grabbed his flashlight and started down the stairs without hesitation. "Come on, guys. This is where the good stuff is." One by one they followed, the sound of their footsteps echoing in the narrow stairwell. The deeper they went, the colder it became until they could see their breath. The steps creaked beneath their feet as they descended, the narrow stairwell swallowing their small flashlight beams. The dampness of the air grew more pungent with each step, the smell of rot growing thicker, almost tangible. Olivia was the first to gag, the stench hitting her in a wave. She covered her mouth and took shallow breaths, but it was useless. It felt like the decay was seeping into her lungs. "Jake, I'm serious. This place smells like something died down here," she hissed, her voice barely above a whisper. The basement felt like it demanded silence, as if even their voices were unwelcome. Jake, as always, pressed on undeterred, though even he couldn't mask his own discomfort. His voice wavered when he responded, "That's what makes it perfect. We're going to get something on tape down here. I can feel it." The others followed, unwilling to be left alone in the house. But their footsteps slowed, their flashlights trembling in their hands. Bree clutched her arm around her stomach, feeling a strange twisting sensation there, like something was physically repelling her from going further. She had always had a sharp sense about things like this, bad vibes, as her friends used to call it. But she had never felt anything as intensely as she did now. "I'm telling you, guys," Bree muttered under her breath. "We need to turn around. Right now. We're not supposed to be here." Aaron, the most skeptical of the group, rolled his eyes but said nothing. Despite his usual bravado, even he was feeling something off. The air was thick, not just from the smell but from the sheer weight of the atmosphere pressing down on them. It was like stepping into a void, a space that didn't belong in the real world. His skin prickled, his stomach knotted, and still, they kept going deeper. The stairwell seemed to stretch forever. The basement below was larger than the house itself. What should have been a few steps down turned into a descent that felt like it would never end. The further they went, the more the house above seemed to disappear, until the only reality was the cold, damp stone beneath their feet and the impenetrable blackness ahead. Finally, after what felt like hours, they reached the bottom. The steps opened into a cavernous space. Their flashlights revealed jagged stone walls, covered in moss and something else. Scratches, as if something had clawed at the stone over and over. The air was still, unnervingly still, and that same smell of rot permeated everything. "Jesus," Sam muttered, waving his hand in front of his face, trying to clear the air as if that would help. What the hell is this place? The basement didn't resemble any kind of normal cellar. It wasn't lined with shelves or crates, or anything that would suggest storage. It was more like a catacomb, carved out of the earth itself. The walls seemed to curve slightly, drawing their attention to the center of the room, where something large and ominous stood covered by a tattered cloth. Okay, Jake whispered, his excitement barely concealed by a thin veil of fear. "This is it. This is what we came for." He approached the covered object, his flashlight beam flickering, as if the batteries were dying. The others watched from behind, tense, their breath held in anticipation. Jake reached out slowly, his fingers trembling, but he steadied himself before grabbing the edge of the cloth. In one swift motion, he pulled it back. Beneath the cloth was a table, but not just any table. It was made of stone, the surface marred with deep grooves and stains. The grooves formed strange symbols. Symbols none of them could recognize, but that felt distinctly wrong, like they had been carved with intent. Atop the table lay an old, leather-bound book, its cover worn and cracked with age. Strange, unidentifiable objects surrounded it. Animal bones, small jars filled with dark liquids, and what looked like fragments of human teeth. The room felt colder. "What the?" Jake said, his voice trailing off as he stared down at the bizarre scene. He reached out for the book, but the second his fingers grazed its surface, a deafening crack reverberated through the basement, as if the very foundation of the house had just been struck by lightning. The ground trembled beneath their feet, and from somewhere deep within the house, a sound emerged. It wasn't like any sound they had ever heard. It wasn't a creak or a groan, nor was it the house settling. It was low and guttural, a deep, reverberating growl that seemed to come from everywhere at once. The sound filled the room, sending shivers down their spines. It was the kind of noise that bypassed logic and hit them at their core, the kind that told them they were no longer alone. Olivia gasped, stepping back instinctively. What the hell was that? Jake froze, his hand still on the book. Maybe it's just the wind. Are you serious? Sam hissed. There's no wind down here. Before Jake could respond, the lights flickered. All of their flashlights in unison blinked out for half a second, plunging them into absolute darkness. When they flickered back on, the room looked the same, except for one thing. The book had opened on its own. The pages were thin, yellowed with age, and filled with strange, spidery handwriting. Symbols similar to those carved into the stone table lined the margins, but the pages weren't still. They rustled gently, as though some unseen force was turning them, and with each page that turned, the strange growl intensified. "Jake, stop messing around," Bree whispered, her voice trembling. "We need to leave, now." Jake nodded, though his hands shook as he grabbed for the camera slung around his neck. His excitement from earlier had melted into something else, something darker. The weight of the situation had finally hit him, and he wasn't sure how to stop it. "I don't know what's happening," he admitted quietly. "But we need to film this. This is real." The ground shook again, this time more violently. The basement's stone walls groaned under the pressure, dust and debris raining down from above. There was a deep crack, and the floor beneath their feet shifted unnervingly. Then, from the far corner of the room, something stirred. Olivia's flashlight was the first to catch it, her beam of light bouncing off something that moved in the shadows. It wasn't clear at first, just a glimpse of something large, something shifting. But as the light focused, it revealed a shape that made all of them freeze. It was a figure, human-like, but only barely. The figure was crouched low, its limbs too long, its back twisted at an unnatural angle. Its skin was pale, stretched taut over its bones, and its eyes, or what should have been eyes, were black pits that stared unblinking from the shadows. Its mouth hung open, its jaw slack, revealing a row of jagged, decayed teeth. For a moment, they could do nothing but stare, their bodies locked in place by sheer terror. Then it moved. The figure straightened, its bones cracking loudly as it stood to its full height, nearly 7 feet tall. Its head jerked unnaturally toward them, and though it had no eyes, they felt its gaze burning into them. It took one slow, deliberate step forward. The growl returned, this time louder, more distinct, like it was coming from inside the figure's chest. The room seemed to tremble with each breath it took, the air growing thicker, suffocating. Jake's camera slipped from his hands, hitting the floor with a loud crack. That was enough to snap them out of their frozen state. "Run!" Olivia screamed, her voice breaking through the silence. They bolted for the stairs, tripping over each other in their desperation to escape. The sound of their footsteps echoed through the basement, but behind them, the creature's steps were louder, heavier, relentless. Jake was the last to reach the stairs. His heart was pounding in his chest, his breath coming in short, panicked gasps. He glanced over his shoulder, and in that moment, he saw it. The creature was moving faster now, its limbs bending and contorting as it crawled after them, its mouth open in a silent scream. "Go! Go! Go!" Jake shouted, pushing Sam up the stairs ahead of him. They didn't stop running until they reached the top, bursting through the basement door and slamming it shut behind them. They collapsed in the hallway, gasping for air, their bodies trembling from the adrenaline coursing through their veins. For a moment, there was silence. Only the sound of their ragged breathing filled the air. Then, from behind the basement door, came a single sharp knock. It was slow, deliberate, and far too calm for what they had just witnessed. Knock, knock, knock. The noise echoed in the hallway, each knock heavier than the last. Something was inside the house with them, something that didn't belong in this world. "We need to get out of here," Bree whispered, her voice barely audible. "We need to leave right now." But before anyone could move, the door to the basement creaked open. The basement door creaked open just an inch, the sound echoing through the hallway. It was a slow, deliberate movement, like something below was savoring every second of the terror it was causing. The space behind the door was pitch black, the light from their flashlights barely reaching into the shadowy stairwell. For a moment, all 5 of them were frozen in place, their hearts pounding, breaths shallow, as they stared at that tiny gap, waiting, dreading what might come next. Olivia was the first to speak, her voice a choked whisper. "We need to run. Now." Jake scrambled to his feet, adrenaline propelling him forward. "Front door! Let's go!" They bolted. No one spoke. No one looked back. Their footsteps thundered through the dilapidated halls as they raced toward the front door. The house seemed to groan around them, the very walls vibrating with some unseen force, as if the thing they had awoken was moving through the house, closing in on them from all sides. Aaron reached the front door first, grasping the handle and yanking it hard. Nothing. The door didn't budge. "No, no, no," he muttered, pulling harder, but the door wouldn't open. He fumbled for the deadbolt, but there wasn't one. The lock had vanished. "What the hell?" Sam shouted, slamming his body against the door in frustration. But it was as if the door had fused with the frame, sealing them inside. "Find another way out," Jake shouted, already rushing toward the living room where they had seen a window earlier. The others followed close behind, their panic rising with each passing second. They reached the window and Aaron tried to pry it open, his fingers slipping on the cold glass. It was sealed shut, just like the door. Bree grabbed a chair, hurling it at the window with all her strength. The chair hit the glass, but instead of shattering, the glass rippled, as if it were made of water, distorting the view of the outside. It wasn't glass at all. Not anymore. The house itself had transformed. "What the hell is going on?" Bree yelled, backing away from the window as the chair fell uselessly to the floor. "The house. It's changing," Olivia stammered, her wide eyes darting around the room. The wallpaper seemed to be shifting before their very eyes, the patterns twisting and warping into grotesque shapes. Skulls, hands, faces contorted in agony, all pressing out from the walls as if trying to escape. "That thing. It's doing this," Jake said, his voice shaking. "We woke it up. The house is alive." A low, guttural growl reverberated through the walls, shaking the entire room. The sound was coming from everywhere and nowhere all at once, like the house itself was growling, hungry for something. Then came the slow, deliberate thud of footsteps. Heavy, dragging footsteps, moving through the hallway outside the room. "It's coming," Sam whispered, his face pale. The others stood motionless, their hearts pounding in their chests. The footsteps grew louder, closer, until they stopped just outside the living room door. For a moment, there was silence, nothing but the sound of their breathing and the creaking of the house around them. Then, the door to the living room swung open. Standing in the doorway was the creature. It was taller now, more grotesque, its limbs too long, its head twisted at an unnatural angle. Its skin, pale and stretched thin, clung to its bones like parchment. The black pits where its eyes should have been seemed to look right through them, and its mouth hung open in a hideous, soundless scream. The creature stepped into the room, its movements jerky and unnatural, like a puppet on strings. Its long, skeletal fingers twitched as it moved toward them, its growl rising from somewhere deep in its chest. Jake reacted first. "Move!" he yelled, pushing the others toward the back door of the house. They bolted through the narrow kitchen and into what looked like a back hallway, the walls here even more decayed and crumbling. But it didn't matter. There had to be another way out. There had to be. The door at the end of the hallway came into view, and Jake slammed into it with his full weight, sending it flying open. Beyond the door was another stairwell, this one descending into even deeper darkness. "Not another basement," Bree groaned, but they had no choice. The footsteps behind them grew louder, the creature moving faster now, its grotesque limbs carrying it forward in a jerky, unnatural gait. It was almost upon them, its growls filling the narrow hallway with a suffocating pressure. "Go! Go!" Jake urged, pushing everyone down the stairs. They descended into the darkness, the air growing colder, the smell of decay thickening. The stairs seemed to spiral, deeper and deeper, far beyond where the foundations of the house should have ended. It felt as though they were being drawn into the bowels of the earth itself. The walls around them were damp, covered in a slimy substance that made every step treacherous. "What is this place?" Olivia muttered, her voice echoing off the stone walls. They reached the bottom, and the room that opened before them was vast, far larger than the house above. It was a cavern, carved out of the rock, and in the center stood a massive stone altar, covered in the same strange symbols they had seen before. The altar was surrounded by ancient flickering candles that lit the room in an eerie, yellowish glow. "It's a ritual chamber," Jake breathed, horror dawning on his face. "This isn't just a haunted house. It's a goddamn sacrifice chamber." Before they could react, the air shifted. The oppressive force of the house seemed to close in, and the stone altar began to pulse with a dull, red light. The symbols carved into its surface glowed faintly, and the very ground beneath their feet trembled. The creature's growl echoed through the chamber, louder now, and they turned to see it standing at the entrance to the cavern, its hollow eyes fixated on the altar. It wasn't moving toward them anymore. Instead, it seemed to be waiting, almost reverent, as if the altar was calling to it. "We need to destroy it," Sam said, his voice frantic. "The altar, the book, whatever it is, it's the source of all of this." Jake grabbed a nearby piece of broken stone, hefting it in his hand. We can break it. We just need to... But before he could finish, the ground beneath the altar cracked open, and from the fissure emerged something far worse than the creature. It was a shape, shifting, twisting, made of shadow and flame, its form impossible to fully comprehend. The thing from the basement, the creature that had chased them, was merely an echo of this. This thing, the true force behind the house. The air around it shimmered with heat, and yet it was as cold as death. The shadow rose from the altar, tendrils of darkness reaching out across the cavern. Its voice was like the deep rumble of the earth, ancient and filled with malice. You trespass on sacred ground, it whispered, though its voice echoed in their minds more than through their ears. You will pay the price. The tendrils shot out toward them, fast as lightning. Olivia screamed as one of the shadowy tendrils wrapped around her ankle, dragging her toward the altar. She clawed at the ground, trying to hold on, but it was useless. "Help!" she screamed, her voice high with terror. Jake rushed forward, grabbing Olivia's hands, but the tendrils were too strong. They pulled her closer, closer to the altar, where the shadow figure loomed, waiting. "No, we're not leaving her," Jake shouted, his grip tightening, but Aaron and Bree pulled him back, their faces pale with terror. "You can't stop it," Bree cried. "We have to go. Now!" With tears streaming down his face, Jake let go, and Olivia was pulled screaming into the darkness. Her final scream was cut off abruptly, swallowed by the shadow, leaving only silence in its wake. "We need to go," Sam whispered, his face ashen. "It's too late for her." But as they turned to flee, the shadowy tendrils lashed out again, wrapping around Sam's legs. He fell to the ground with a cry, clawing at the stone as the shadow began to pull him toward the altar. This time, there was no hesitation. The others ran. They sprinted up the spiraling stairwell, their hearts pounding, the house shaking around them. The shadow was following, its tendrils reaching out, clawing at the walls, pulling them back into its grasp. The house itself seemed to be crumbling, the very foundation breaking apart under the weight of the ancient evil they had disturbed. Jake could hear Sam's screams behind them, but he couldn't stop. He wouldn't. He had to survive. He had to get out. They reached the top of the stores and burst back into the hallway of the house. But something was different now. The house had changed. The walls were no longer wood and plaster. They were stone, ancient and cold, as if the house had fully transformed into the crypt it had always been. The front door was gone, replaced by solid stone, and there were no windows, no way out. "We're trapped," Aaron said, his voice hollow with despair. "We're trapped," Aaron repeated, his voice trembling with fear and disbelief. The walls, now cold and solid like ancient stone, seemed to pulse as if alive, breathing in time with their pounding hearts. Every doorway was gone, replaced with featureless stone, as if the house had decided to seal them inside for good. The oppressive darkness from the basement felt closer now, like it was suffocating them, filling the air with a low, relentless pressure. Jake stood frozen for a moment, staring at the walls. His mind raced for answers, for some explanation, but there was nothing left. He had no plan, no camera to document their escape, no escape route to lead them through. The house had twisted into something beyond their comprehension, and now, it seemed, it was ready to consume them. We can't stay here," Bree stammered, her eyes wide and desperate. "We have to find another way out. There has to be a way out." But even as she said it, her voice faltered. Deep down, they all knew the truth. This place had been waiting for them, waiting for anyone foolish enough to come inside, to awaken whatever had been slumbering beneath the ground. It wasn't just a house. It wasn't haunted in the way ghost stories made you believe. This place was the curse. It was alive, and it had been feeding on fear for centuries. Behind them, the rumbling from the basement grew louder, and with it, the guttural, reverberating growl of the shadow creature. Its tendrils seemed to spread out, seeping through the cracks in the floor, curling along the walls, searching for them. Each dark tendril snaked out like a predator's tongue, tasting the air for their fear. And then came the voice, the deep, ancient voice that vibrated inside their skulls. You thought you could escape. It wasn't a question. The voice was absolute, filled with an ancient authority, as if it had seen countless others before them, tried and failed. No one escapes. The walls seemed to tremble with laughter, a dark, cruel laughter that echoed through the very stones. Jake felt his chest tighten, his breath quickening as he backed up against the nearest wall, his eyes darting around the room. "There's got to be something," Aaron cried out, frantic. "We can't just—" But before he could finish, one of the shadowy tendrils shot out from the floor, wrapping around his ankle. He screamed as it yanked him off his feet, dragging him across the stone floor toward the center of the room where the shadows converged. "Help me!" Aaron's voice was raw, desperate as he clawed at the ground, trying to find something to hold on to. But there was nothing. The stone was smooth, unforgiving, offering no grip as the shadow pulled him closer to the darkness that pooled at the center of the room. Jake and Bree rushed forward, grabbing Aaron's arms, but the force pulling him was relentless. The shadow was stronger, hungrier. Aaron's terrified eyes locked onto Jake's, pleading, "Don't let me go." Aaron whimpered, but his voice cracked under the weight of terror. Jake's grip tightened, but the shadows were too strong. With a final violent tug, Aaron was wrenched from their hands, his scream cut short as the shadow swallowed him whole, dragging him down into the floor as if it were liquid. The darkness rippled, then stilled, leaving nothing behind. Bree collapsed to her knees, sobbing, her hands shaking uncontrollably. "We're not getting out of here, are we?" she whispered, broken, as tears streamed down her face. Jake wanted to reassure her, to tell her there was still hope, but the words wouldn't come. He didn't believe it himself. The house, the thing that lived in this house, wasn't going to let them leave. He could feel it in his bones, in the very air that pressed down on them. The shadows were moving again, slithering up the walls like a tide rising, ready to consume them next. There was no time left to think, no time for plans. They were either going to escape now, or they were going to die here. "There's one thing we haven't tried," Jake said, his voice shaky but determined. Bree looked up at him, eyes red and swollen. What could we possibly do?" Jake's eyes flickered toward the altar, the stone table, the book. "The book," he said, his voice gaining strength. It all started when I touched the book. Maybe we can stop it the same way." Bree's face paled. "You can't be serious. That thing, whatever that thing is, came from that book. You want to go back? We don't have a choice." Jake's jaw clenched. "This whole place, everything, it's tied to that book. If we can destroy it, maybe we can break whatever's holding us here. Maybe we can stop it." Bree hesitated, her eyes flicking to the shadows creeping ever closer. The tendrils were already stretching across the floor, inching toward them. She didn't want to go back down to that basement, but the alternative was worse. Much worse. "Okay." She finally whispered. "Okay." Jake helped her to her feet, and together they ran, back through the hallway, back toward the twisted stairwell that led to the basement. The walls seemed to pulse and shift around them, as if the house was fighting back, trying to confuse them, but they forced their way through, descending the stairs two at a time. The basement was colder now, almost freezing, and the altar glowed faintly in the distance. The shadow was everywhere, swirling around the room like a living storm, but at its heart was the altar and the book. "Go!" Jake shouted, rushing forward. He could feel the shadowy tendrils brushing against his skin, cold and clammy, but he pushed through, his eyes locked on the altar. Bree was right behind him, her breath coming in short, terrified gasps. The darkness was closing in, pressing against them, suffocating them. But Jake reached the altar first. The book lay open, its pages fluttering, the symbols on its surface glowing faintly, alive with dark magic. Jake didn't hesitate. He grabbed the book with both hands, lifted it above his head, and slammed it down against the stone altar with all his strength. The impact sent a shockwave through the room, the air trembling as the shadows recoiled, shrieking in pain. "Do it again," Bree cried. Jake lifted the book again and slammed it down harder, the pages ripping as the ancient leather binding cracked. The room began to shake violently, the stone altar splintering beneath the force of each blow. The shadow writhed and screamed, its tendrils flailing, but it was growing weaker, pulling back toward the center of the room. "Come on, you son of a..." Jake shouted, lifting the book one last time and bringing it down with everything he had. The altar shattered beneath the blow, the stone splitting in two, and the book itself burst into flames. The shadows screamed. A high-pitched, inhuman wail filled the air, reverberating off the walls as the darkness began to collapse in on itself. The tendrils snapped back, retreating into the floor, the walls, the cracks. The very foundation of the house seemed to tremble as the shadow was pulled back into the earth, dragged down into the pit where it had been summoned long ago. For a moment, the room was filled with a blinding white light, and then silence. Jake and Bree stood motionless, staring at the ruined altar, their breaths ragged. The basement was still now, the oppressive weight lifted. The house was quiet, empty. It's over," Bree whispered, her voice barely audible. Jake nodded, though he could barely believe it himself. The book was gone, the shadow was gone, and for the first time since they had entered the house, it felt like they were alone. They turned and walked back up the stairs, slowly, their bodies aching from the terror and exhaustion. The house had returned to its original state, decaying, empty, lifeless. The walls were once again wood and plaster, the doors hanging loose from their hinges. The windows, shattered and broken, let in the pale light of the moon. When they reached the front door, it was open. Jake stepped outside first, breathing in the cold night air. Bree followed, her hands shaking, but her face was set in a strange mixture of relief and disbelief. They had made it. Somehow, they had survived. They stood in silence for a long moment, staring at the house. The Blackwell house loomed behind them, dark and silent, just as it had been when they arrived. But something was different now. It wasn't just a house anymore. It wasn't haunted. It was dead. "I can't believe we made it out," Bree whispered, tears welling in her eyes. Jake nodded, but his expression remained distant, his mind still reeling from everything they had just endured. "We should go," he said quietly. "We need to get far away from this place." As they turned to leave, Jake glanced back one last time at the Blackwell house. The windows were dark, empty, but just for a second, he could have sworn he saw a shadow move behind the glass, a figure, tall and twisted, watching them. He blinked, and it was gone. I know many of you use these videos to sleep, so before you drift off, like the video and subscribe. But tonight, I want you to stay with me for a little while longer, just to hear this one story. Because sometimes, sleep can be the scariest thing of all. Have you ever heard of a town that just disappears? It sounds impossible, right? You hear about abandoned places, ghost towns left behind after industry fails, or natural disasters strike. But a town that simply vanishes, swallowed by the earth, or erased from maps, that can't happen. At least, that's what I thought. I came across the story of Hastings quite by accident. I'm a freelance journalist, always on the lookout for quirky or strange stories that haven't been covered to death. I was doing research for an article on small-town legends, and in my search, I stumbled upon a brief mention of a place called Hastings in an old online forum. There wasn't much, just a vague reference to it as a lost town in northern Pennsylvania. Curious, I dug a little deeper. I couldn't find any recent articles about it. No maps showed a town by that name. Even stranger, there were no historical records, census data, or old newspapers mentioning it at all. It was as if Hastings had never existed. But there were rumors. I found a few obscure blogs and a couple of conspiracy theorists' videos that claimed Hastings had disappeared sometime in the 1990s. The stories all had similar threads. A small town, one of those everyone knows everyone kinds of places, that just stopped being. According to those sources, it wasn't that Hastings had been abandoned. Its residents had vanished, overnight, without a trace. The more I searched, the weirder things got. People claimed they remembered passing through Hastings as kids or hearing about it from family members. But no one could produce photos, letters, or anything concrete to prove its existence. It was always second-hand information, rumors, fleeting memories, whispers. And that's what drew me in. I decided I was going to find out what had happened to Hastings. The trip wasn't exactly easy. I'm based out of Philadelphia, so I drove for about 4 hours north into the more rural parts of Pennsylvania, passing through small towns that felt stuck in time. The roads became narrower and less well kept, As I got closer to the supposed location of Hastings, based on the rough coordinates I'd pieced together from those blogs and forums. It was getting dark by the time I turned off the main highway onto a gravel road that led into dense woods. There were no street signs, no markers, just the occasional faded "No Trespassing" sign nailed to the trees. I started to feel uneasy. It wasn't just the isolation, though that was part of it. It was more like the world around me was different. The air felt heavier. The silence was thick, like the forest itself was watching me, waiting for me to make a mistake. Every sound, from the crunch of gravel under my tires to the rustle of the wind in the trees, felt amplified, like the woods were amplifying everything. After driving for what felt like an hour on that gravel road, I noticed something strange. The road had begun to slope downward, and the trees were thinning out. And then, just as suddenly I had entered the woods, I saw it. A clearing. And in that clearing, there was a town. It wasn't large, maybe a dozen or so buildings. There was a gas station, a small general store, a post office, and a row of old houses lining a dirt road that ran through the middle. The buildings were old, weathered by time and neglect. The windows were broken, the doors hanging loosely from their hinges. But there was something else. Something I couldn't quite place. The town looked as if it had been preserved in time, but not abandoned in the way most ghost towns are. It was like someone had just stepped away for a moment, like they'd be back any second. My heart pounded in my chest as I parked the car at the edge of the town and got out. The air was still, too still. No sounds of birds or insects, no wind through the trees. Just the eerie silence, pressing down on me like a weight. I grabbed my phone and started recording, narrating as I walked toward the center of the town. I was excited. This was what I had come for. Proof that Hastings existed, that something strange had happened here, but the deeper I ventured into the town, the more uneasy I felt. The buildings, though decayed, had signs of life, or rather, signs of lives that had once been. Toys left scattered on a porch, a lawnmower rusting away in someone's yard, laundry still hanging on a clothesline, stiff and faded. It was as if the people had left in the middle of their daily lives and never returned. I approached the gas station first. The front of the building half collapsed, but the pump still stood, rusting and ancient. As I got closer, I noticed something strange. The price of gas displayed on the old mechanical meter was absurdly low, prices from decades ago. That made sense given the state of the town. But the strangest part was that the pump handle was still hanging from the machine, the nozzle uncapped, as if someone had just used it. "Hello?" I called out, the sound of my voice startling in the silence. It echoed back to me, distorted by the emptiness of the town. No answer, of course. I ventured further, walking down the dirt road toward the general store. Its windows were cracked but not broken, and the door was slightly ajar. I pushed it open with a creak, stepping inside. The store was just as eerie as the rest of the town. The shelves were stocked with items, cans of food, boxes of cereal, bags of flour, but everything was coated in a thick layer of dust. The cash register sat on the counter, open, with a few dollar bills scattered inside. A calendar hung on the wall, the pages yellowed with age. I squinted at the date, November of 1994. The rumors were true. Hastings had disappeared in the 1990s. I pulled out my phone again and snapped a few pictures, my excitement mounting. This was incredible. An entire town, frozen in time. But as I moved deeper into the store, I felt that heavy silence again, like something was watching me. I kept turning around, expecting to see someone standing in the doorway, but there was never anyone there. I reached for one of the cans on the shelf, brushing off the dust, when I heard it. A soft thud. I froze, my heart skipping a beat. It came from the back of the store. I stood still, listening. The air was so still that I could hear my own heartbeat, loud and insistent in my ears. Another thud, louder this time, like something heavy had fallen over. I should have left. I should have turned around, walked out of that store, and driven away from Hastings without looking back. But I didn't. Instead, I grabbed the flashlight from my bag and made my way toward the sound. The back of the store was even darker, the windows too covered in grime to let in any light. I shone the flashlight down the aisle, illuminating stacks of boxes and old crates. Nothing out of the ordinary. But that's when I noticed the back door. It was slightly open, just a crack, as if someone had slipped through. For a moment, I hesitated. This was how horror movies started. Someone hearing a strange noise and going to investigate, only to meet some gruesome fate. But I had come this far, and I wasn't about to leave without figuring out what had happened here. I pushed the door open and stepped outside. The backyard of the store was overgrown with weeds, but there was something else. A small shed, tucked away in the corner of the lot. Its door was slightly open, just like the back door of the store. I approached slowly, my flashlight beam shaking in my trembling hand. As I got closer, I saw the door was marked with scratches, deep gouges carved into the wood, as if something had tried to claw its way inside. Or out. Another thud came from inside the shed, louder this time. My pulse quickened, fear rising in my throat, but I couldn't turn back now. I reached for the door, my fingers trembling as I grasped the handle. And then, just as I was about to pull the door open, I heard a whisper. It was faint, barely audible, but unmistakable. A soft, rasping voice coming from inside the shed. "Help me." I jerked my hand back, my heart racing. The whisper was so quiet, so fragile, like it was on the verge of breaking apart. "Help me." The voice came again, a little louder this time. It was close. Too close. I turned and ran. I didn't stop until I reached my car, my breath coming in ragged gasps. I fumbled with the keys, my hands shaking so badly that I dropped them twice before I finally got the car unlocked. I threw myself into the driver's seat and slammed the door, locking it. For a long moment, I just sat there, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. My mind raced, trying to process what had just happened. The voice, the thud, the scratched door. It wasn't my imagination. I had heard something, inside that shed. But the way the voice had whispered, the strained tone, it wasn't quite right. It wasn't human. I needed to leave. I started the car, the engine roaring to life, breaking the eerie silence that had settled over the town. But as I looked out the windshield, I froze. Standing in the middle of the road, Just in front of the exit to the town was a figure. At first, it looked like a person, an older man, wearing a tattered coat and a wide-brimmed hat, his back hunched, as if he were weighed down by something. He stood perfectly still, staring in my direction, though I couldn't make out his face in the growing darkness. My heart pounded harder. Every instinct screamed at me to drive, to get out of there, but something kept me glued to the spot. My eyes locked onto the figure, and for what felt like an eternity, neither of us moved. Then, slowly, the figure raised its arm, pointing directly at me. A chill ran down my spine. The movement was unnaturally slow, jerky, as if the man's limbs were stiff, unused to motion. He didn't speak, didn't move any closer, just pointed. And then, without warning, the headlights of my car flickered and died, plunging everything into darkness. Panic surged through me. I fumbled for the switch, flicking the headlights on and off, but nothing happened. I turned the key in the ignition, but the engine sputtered and stalled. The car was dead. I slammed my hands against the steering wheel, my breath coming in rapid, shallow bursts. I glanced up, praying the figure had disappeared in the darkness. But he hadn't. He was closer now. I hadn't seen him move. He hadn't made a sound, but somehow he had closed half the distance between us. I could see him more clearly now, in the faint glow of the moonlight. His clothes were ragged, torn, hanging loosely off his thin frame. His face was wrong. It was pale, almost translucent, and where his eyes should have been, there were only deep, empty hollows. He raised his arm again, pointing at me, his mouth opening in a silent scream. I was frozen, paralyzed by fear. I couldn't move, couldn't think. My mind was trapped in a whirlpool of terror, unable to comprehend what I was seeing. Then, suddenly, the car's engine roared back to life on its own. The headlights flickered on, flooding the road with light. The figure was gone. My heart was pounding in my ears as I slammed my foot on the gas. The tires squealed as the car lurched forward, speeding down the road, away from Hastings, away from whatever had been waiting for me there. I didn't look back. I couldn't. The gravel road stretched on for miles, winding through the dark forest that felt more alive now, its shadows shifting in the corners of my vision. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being followed, that something was chasing me, just out of sight. The trees loomed over the road like dark sentinels, their branches clawing at the sky. I drove for what felt like hours, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly that they ached. The road seemed endless, and for a terrifying moment, I thought I might never escape, that I'd be trapped on this road forever, endlessly looping through the dark woods. But then, just as suddenly as it had started, the trees began to thin. The road straightened out, and I could see the faint glow of a distant town in the distance. I breathed a sigh of relief, my muscles relaxing for the first time in what felt like forever. I was safe, or so I thought. I reached the nearest gas station and pulled in, parking under the bright fluorescent lights. The station was old, but still functional, with a single attendant sitting behind the counter inside. I grabbed my phone, planning to call someone, anyone, and tell them what had happened. But when I looked at my phone, my stomach dropped. No signal. Not even a single bar. I stared at the screen in disbelief. I hadn't noticed it while driving, but now, sitting still, I realized I had been completely cut off since I entered Hastings. No phone calls, no GPS, nothing. It was as if the town had erased my connection to the outside world. I stepped out of the car, the cool night air hitting my face, and walked inside the gas station. The attendant, an older man with a thick beard, glanced up from his magazine as I approached. "Need help?" he asked, his voice gruff. Yeah," I stammered. "Do you have a payphone? My phone's not working." He raised an eyebrow. "Payphone? You're not going to find one of those out here. We haven't had a working payphone in years." My stomach tightened. "Then, can I use your phone? It's an emergency." He studied me for a moment, then nodded, motioning to the landline behind the counter. I stepped forward and grabbed it, dialing the number for my editor. The phone rang once, twice, then nothing. Just static. I tried another number, then another. The same result every time. Static. I put the phone down, my hands shaking. The attendant watched me with a frown. "You all right, kid? You look like you've seen a ghost." I forced a smile, trying to shake off the fear that was still gnawing at me. Yeah, I'm fine. Just long drive." I thanked him and headed back outside to my car, my mind racing. Something was wrong, something I couldn't explain, but I couldn't stay here. I needed to keep moving, to get as far away from Hastings as possible. As I reached for the car door, I froze. There, on the windshield, was a single word, written in the dust. "Leave." My blood ran cold. I hadn't written it. No one had been near my car. But the word was there, clear as day, scrawled in the dust like a warning. I got back into the car, my hand shaking as I started the engine again. I didn't look around, didn't stop to think. I just drove. I didn't stop until I reached the next town, miles away from that gas station. When I finally parked and got out, I checked my phone again. Full signal. Everything was normal. But Hastings was gone. No map, no GPS coordinates, no mention of it online. Even the blogs and forums I had found before were gone, as if they had been wiped clean. There was no trace of the town, no sign that it ever existed. But I know what I saw. I know I found Hastings, and I know that whatever is still there, lurking in that forgotten place, isn't done yet. If you're still awake, do me a favor, like the video and subscribe. And if you ever hear about a place like Hastings, do yourself a favor and don't go looking for it. As I sat in the parking lot of that small town, miles away from Hastings, I tried to make sense of everything that had happened. My hands were still trembling, my heart racing in my chest. I stared at the word, "Leave," scrawled on the windshield. It had faded now, nearly gone, but I couldn't stop thinking about who or what had written it. Had it been a warning or something else? I leaned back in my seat, trying to catch my breath, my mind buzzing with unanswered questions. What was Hastings? How had it disappeared from the world, and why couldn't anyone find it anymore? And most importantly, what was still there? The town I was parked in felt safe, normal even. Cars passed by on the main road. The distant hum of life continued as it always had. But something gnawed at me, a persistent feeling that I wasn't truly free of whatever haunted that place. I had left Hastings behind, but it hadn't left me. I could feel it, like a splinter lodged deep under my skin. After a long while, I checked my phone again, staring at the screen as it displayed full signal. Reluctantly, I opened my email app, fully expecting everything to be normal, my prior experience some kind of terrible hallucination. But the emails from earlier, old ones I had used to search for Hastings, were gone, completely wiped. I searched for the names of blogs I had come across, tried finding the forum posts. There was nothing, not even a single trace. It was as if they had been deleted from existence. Hastings had scrubbed itself from reality. The erasure wasn't just on the map. It was online, in people's memories, in history itself. But one thing wasn't gone. I scrolled through my phone and opened the camera app. My heart pounded when I saw it. The pictures I had taken. They were still there, blurry shots of the gas station, the general store, and the street leading into the town. Proof. I swiped through them rapidly, each image sending a fresh wave of anxiety through my body. And then I stopped on one image, one that made my blood run cold. The last photo I'd taken was of the general store. In the corner of the shot, just barely visible, was a figure. A man standing in the doorway, half shrouded in shadow, his face turned toward the camera. I hadn't seen him when I took the picture. I was sure of it. But there he was, in the frame. The same figure that had appeared in the road. Suddenly, my phone screen flickered. The image glitched, distorting for a moment before freezing. Then, without warning, the screen went black. I stared at my phone in disbelief. The battery had been at 60% just minutes ago. I tried turning it back on, but it was completely dead. Frustration and panic surged through me. Whatever was happening, it wasn't over. Hastings had somehow reached out, despite all logic, despite me having left it behind. I needed to talk to someone. I needed answers. I drove into town, heading straight for the nearest diner. It was late now, probably close to midnight, but small diners like these tended to stay open all night for long-haul truckers and travelers. The neon sign flickered, and a few cars sat parked outside, the soft glow of the lights spilling out onto the dark street. Inside, the place was mostly empty, except for a couple of patrons sitting at the counter. I took a seat in a booth at the back, hoping for some privacy, though the waitress gave me a curious look as she approached. "Rough night?" she asked, chewing on a piece of gum as she set down a menu. "Yeah, something like that," I muttered, glancing up at her. "Do you know if there's any Wi-Fi around here? My phone died." She pointed to the back wall. "We've got a payphone in the corner if you need to make a call." Of course, no Wi-Fi in a town this small. I thanked her and ordered a coffee, my mind racing as I considered my next move. Without access to the internet, without being able to contact anyone. I felt cut off from everything. My phone still wasn't turning on, so I scribbled down some notes in my notepad, trying to remember the exact coordinates of where Hastings had been. I wrote down every strange detail I could remember, just in case. The waitress brought my coffee, and as I sat there sipping it, I noticed an older man sitting alone at the counter. He was watching me. His face was worn and weathered, his eyes sharp. When I caught his gaze, he quickly looked away, turning his attention back to his cup of coffee. Something about him seemed off. I looked around the diner again, noting how oddly empty it was for this time of night. Only a couple of other customers, the waitress and this old man. The strange, heavy silence that had haunted me since Hastings was back, like a presence that refused to let me go. I was about to finish my coffee and leave when the man got up from the counter and walked toward me. I tensed up, instinctively bracing myself, but when he spoke, his voice was quiet, almost hesitant. "You were up near Hastings, weren't you?" I froze, staring at him. "I don't know what you're talking about," I said, trying to sound casual, but my voice came out shaky. The man gave me a knowing look, his eyes narrowing. "I can see it on you. That place doesn't let go. You think you can just walk away, but it follows you. It always does." My stomach turned. How did he know? "You've been there?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. The man nodded slowly, his face grim. "A long time ago, before it went dark, before they disappeared. But it's been there all along, waiting for someone to notice, waiting for someone to come looking." He sat down across from me, his movements slow and deliberate, like he was carrying a great weight. "You want to know what happened, don't you? What happened to Hastings?" I swallowed hard, nodding. "You're not the first to go searching for it," he said, his voice low. "People have been trying to find Hastings for years, but most of them never come back. And the ones who do, well, they're never the same. That place changes you." "Changes you how?" I asked, leaning forward. The man glanced around the diner, as if making sure no one was listening. Then he lowered his voice even further. "Hastings was like any other small town once. People lived their lives, went about their business. But something happened in the late 80s. Strange things started happening. People began disappearing. At first it was just a few, but then whole families went missing, and those that stayed, they changed." "Changed how?" I asked again, feeling a knot form in my stomach. "Mentally, at first. The people who stayed began acting strange, talking about hearing voices, seeing things that weren't there. They started to believe the town itself was alive, that something beneath the ground was feeding on them. They tried to leave, but Hastings wouldn't let them go. They were trapped." My mind reeled as he spoke, piecing together the bits of the story with what I'd seen. The eerie silence, the sudden vanishing of the town, the figure in the road. Could it all be connected? "What was it?" I asked. "What was feeding on them?" The old man leaned back in his seat, a shadow passing over his face. "No one knows for sure. But the people who went missing, the ones who were never found, they weren't taken by something physical. It was like the town itself absorbed them. Hastings consumes people. It consumes their memories, their existence. They disappear without a trace. I felt a cold sweat break out on the back of my neck. The photographs, the internet searches, the voice that had whispered from the shed. It all made sense now. The more people who went missing, the stronger Hastings became, he continued, until one day, the whole town just blinked out, gone, like it was never there, but it's still out there in the shadows, waiting, watching. He leaned closer, his eyes locking onto mine. And now that you've been there, it's watching you. A shiver ran down my spine. I wanted to tell him that I hadn't stayed, that I'd escaped, but the truth was gnawing at me, eating away at my confidence. The feeling of being followed hadn't left me. The strange occurrences, the figure in the road, the word on my windshield. Was Hastings still watching me, even now? I stood up suddenly, needing to get away. I threw a few bills on the table, enough to cover my coffee, and turned toward the door. "Leaving won't help," the man called after me. "Once Hastings has its eyes on you, there's no running from it. It'll come for you eventually." I hurried out of the diner, the cool night air hitting me like a slap to the face. My heart was racing, my mind spinning. I fumbled with my car keys, my hands shaking as I unlocked the door. I jumped inside, locking the doors behind me, and started the engine. As I sat in the car, the engine idling, the man's words echoed relentlessly in my mind. Once Hastings has its eyes on you, there's no running from it. It'll come for you, eventually. I couldn't shake the feeling that he was right. Everything about Hastings, its vanishing, the strange occurrences, and the things I had seen, seemed to defy explanation, as if the town operated under a different set of rules. It didn't just exist in a physical sense. It was something much worse, something that reached beyond what I could understand. I gripped the steering wheel, staring out at the dark road ahead. I didn't know where to go. The man had said there was no running, that leaving wouldn't help. But what else was I supposed to do? Go back to the town? Stay here and wait for whatever was following me to finally catch up? I couldn't. I wouldn't. Without another thought, I pulled out of the parking lot and drove. The road stretched out ahead of me, winding through the small town and back onto the highway. For the next hour, I drove in silence, the hum of the engine the only sound breaking the stillness. My headlights carved out a path in the darkness, but every shadow seemed to pulse and move, as if the world outside the car was alive, watching me, waiting for the right moment to strike. I checked the rear-view mirror more times than I could count, half expecting to see the figure from the road standing there, watching me. But the road behind me was empty. Just an endless expanse of darkness. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being followed. It wasn't until I reached the outskirts of the next town that I began to feel a little safer. The glow of streetlights, the occasional passing car, they all felt like anchors to the real world, pulling me back from the brink of madness. I pulled into a motel parking lot, exhausted and desperate for some rest. The sign out front flickered in neon letters. Vacancy. The small, shabby motel looked like it had seen better days. But at that point, I didn't care. I just needed somewhere to hole up for the night. Somewhere that felt disconnected from whatever was lurking out there. Somewhere I could think. I parked the car and walked inside. The lobby was small and dingy, with peeling wallpaper and a single buzzing fluorescent light overhead. A bored-looking woman sat behind the counter, flipping through a magazine. She barely glanced at me as I approached. "Need a room," I said, my voice sounding more strained than I'd intended. She glanced up, eyes glazed with disinterest. "One night." I nodded, sliding over my credit card. As she ran the card through, I looked around the empty lobby. The walls felt too close, the light too dim. Every sound seemed too loud in the silence. I was jumpy, on edge. Every creak, every shuffle of paper made me feel like I was being watched. My mind was racing again, playing tricks on me. I forced myself to take deep breaths, to calm down. I was safe here. I had left Hastings behind, or so I kept telling myself. The woman handed me a room key with a board. Room 12, down the hall. She didn't look at me again, as though I didn't really exist in her world. I took the key and headed toward my room, my footsteps echoing off the cracked linoleum floor as I walked down the dimly lit hallway. When I opened the door to room 12, I was hit by a wave of stale air. The room was basic, a small bed with a thin comforter, a cracked TV set on top of a wooden dresser, and a tiny bathroom off to the side. It was as unremarkable as a room could be, but I didn't care. I was too tired to care. I tossed my bag onto the bed and sat down, running a hand through my hair. My phone was still dead, and there was no charger in sight. I felt completely cut off from the outside world. It was just me and my thoughts now, and the fear gnawing at the edges of my mind. I stared at the dead screen of my phone, willing it to turn on, but it didn't. With a sigh, I leaned back on the bed, staring up at the ceiling. The old man's words came back to me, replaying over and over in my head. Hastings consumes people. I didn't want to believe it. I didn't want to believe that a place could have that kind of power, that it could reach out beyond its borders and take hold of people's lives. But something about it felt true. There was something wrong about Hastings, something that defied reason. And whatever it was, I had gotten too close. I tried to push the thoughts away, but sleep wouldn't come. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the figure in the road, the deep, hollow eyes watching me from the shadows. I heard the whisper again, faint but insistent. "Help me." I jerked awake, gasping, my heart pounding. I wasn't sure if I had even been asleep. It was as if the line between dreams and reality was blurring. I glanced at the clock on the nightstand. It was nearly 2 a.m. The room was silent, but it wasn't the comforting silence of sleep. It was the same heavy, oppressive stillness that had followed me from Hastings. Then I heard it. A thud. It came from outside the room, from somewhere down the hallway. I sat up listening. Another thud, louder this time, followed by the soft creak of floorboards. Someone was out there. My heart raced as I got up from the bed, creeping toward the door. I pressed my ear against the wood, straining to hear. The footsteps were slow and deliberate, growing closer. Then a voice. Quiet, almost too quiet to hear, but unmistakable. "Help me." My blood ran cold. It was the same voice I had heard in Hastings, the same voice that had whispered from the shed. I backed away from the door, my breath coming in shallow gasps. This couldn't be happening. I was miles away. I had left the town. I had escaped. But the footsteps continued, growing louder, closer, until they stopped right outside my door. I stood frozen in the middle of the room, staring at the door as the handle slowly turned. I wanted to run, to hide, but my legs wouldn't move. I was paralyzed with fear, my heart hammering in my chest as the door creaked open. And then I saw it. Standing in the doorway was the figure from Hastings, the man with the hollow eyes, his face pale and twisted, his mouth hanging open in that same silent scream. He stepped into the room, his movements jerky and unnatural, like a puppet on strings. I backed up until I hit the wall, my mind screaming at me to run. But I couldn't. I was trapped. The figure took another step toward me, his arm raising, pointing at me just like he had before. And then, from the shadows behind him, more figures emerged. Twisted, hollow-eyed figures, their faces blank and empty. They filled the room surrounding me, their mouths opening in unison as they whispered in that same voice, "Help me!" I screamed. I don't remember much after that. When I woke up, I was lying on the floor of the motel room, drenched in sweat. The figures were gone. The room was empty. I staggered to my feet, my head spinning, my heart racing. I glanced at the clock. It was 6 a.m. Had it all been a nightmare? My body ached as I grabbed my things and hurried out of the room. I didn't even stop to check out. I just got into my car and drove, speeding away from the motel as fast as I could. I didn't care where I was going, I just needed to get away. But as I drove, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was still following me, that Hastings was still watching me, waiting for me to come back. I looked into the rear-view mirror, expecting to see the road behind me, empty and quiet. But instead, I saw the figure, standing in the middle of the road, just as he had been before, watching me, waiting. The man at the diner was right. You can leave Hastings, but it never leaves you. It follows you, watches you, waits for the right moment to pull you back in. I don't know what's going to happen next, but if you ever hear about a place called Hastings, do yourself a favor. Stay far, far away, because once you go there, it's already too late. I know many of you use these videos to sleep, so before you drift off, like the video and subscribe. Tonight, though, I suggest you stay alert. What I'm about to share isn't the kind of story that will lull you to sleep. It's the kind that will make you second-guess every shadow, every bump in the night. The empty house. There's something about an empty house, not an abandoned one, not a derelict crumbling structure overtaken by time and nature, but an empty, well-kept house, the kind that looks like someone could live there, should live there, but doesn't. It's unsettling in a way that's hard to explain. It's the absence of life, the absence of something you can't quite put your finger on. That's what kept gnawing at me the entire time I dealt with the Davis house. It started, as these things usually do, with a simple favor. I'm a real estate agent, specializing in homes that are difficult to sell, which basically means I handle the places that make people uneasy. Homes with weird histories, Places that have been on the market too long, or the rare ones that have a stigma attached to them. You know, the kind of houses people whisper about. The Davis house was different, though. It didn't have a dark past, at least not one that anyone knew of. There were no tragic deaths, no scandalous rumors. On paper, it was perfect. A large 2-story home in a quiet suburban neighborhood, freshly renovated, ready for the next family to move in. But it had been sitting empty for months, and my boss wanted it sold. That's when he asked me to step in. "Just take a look at it," he said. "Figure out why it's not moving." I wasn't thrilled about it. Empty houses tend to unsettle me in ways I can't quite explain, but I've been doing this long enough to know that feelings aren't facts. I'd walked through dozens of similar homes, and they all had the same eerie silence, the same strange stillness. I figured this one would be no different. When I arrived, the neighborhood was exactly as you'd expect. Neatly trimmed lawns, quiet streets, children's bikes abandoned in driveways. The Davis house, though, stood out. It wasn't run down, but something about it felt wrong. Not visually, but in a way I could feel deep in my gut. The house was large, modern, and immaculately kept. The lawn was trimmed, the windows sparkled in the sunlight, and the paint was fresh. Yet, as I stood there staring at it, I felt a chill run down my spine. The key was in the lockbox, and I fumbled with it for a moment, trying to shake off the unease that had settled over me. When I finally managed to get inside, I was struck by the smell. Nothing rotting or moldy, just air. Stale, unused air. It was like the house had been sealed up for years, despite looking like it had just been cleaned that morning. The floors were spotless, the kitchen gleamed, and the furniture, minimal as it was, looked brand new. Yet, something about the house felt wrong. Empty. I shrugged off the feeling and got to work, taking notes on the layout, the lighting, anything that might explain why potential buyers weren't interested. But as I moved from room to room, the feeling of being watched grew stronger. I checked my phone, looking for messages from my boss, but there was nothing. Then I heard it, a faint creak, like someone shifting their weight on the floor above me. I froze. The house was empty. I had checked every room on the first floor, and no one was supposed to be here. But the sound was unmistakable, like the wood groaning under someone's weight. I convinced myself it was just the house settling. It happens in older homes, even ones that look as pristine as this. But then I heard it again, louder this time, like footsteps, deliberate and slow. My heart pounded as I stared up at the ceiling, my body tensing with every soft creak. Was someone upstairs? Did I miss a room? I took a deep breath and climbed the stairs, trying to keep my movements quiet. The second floor was just as empty as the first. There were 3 bedrooms and a bathroom, each one eerily perfect. But there was nothing, no sign of anyone or anything that could have caused the noise. I checked the closets, the bathroom, even the attic access panel in the hallway. Everything was empty. But then I noticed something. The master bedroom's window, which faced the backyard, was open just a crack. I was sure I hadn't opened it, but maybe it had been left like that by accident. I walked over to it, intending to close it when I stopped dead in my tracks. There, just beyond the window, was a figure. A person standing in the backyard, their back to the house. They were motionless, standing completely still in the middle of the yard, facing away from me. I blinked, trying to make sense of it. The yard was fenced in, and there was no gate. No one should have been able to get back there without me knowing. I stepped closer to the window, squinting against the light. The figure didn't move. It was as if they were rooted to the spot, staring at something I couldn't see. "Hey!" I shouted through the glass, trying to sound authoritative. "What are you doing here?" No response. I felt a knot tighten in my stomach. Whoever it was, they shouldn't be there. I couldn't see their face, just the outline of a person in a dark coat, standing too still, too rigid. The way they were positioned, almost unnaturally stiff, sent a shiver down my spine. I hurried downstairs, my heart hammering as I raced to the back door. When I reached it and threw it open, I expected to see the figure, standing exactly where I'd seen them from the window. But the yard was empty. Completely empty. I stood in the doorway, staring at the spot where the person had been just moments before. The grass was undisturbed, and the wooden fence that surrounded the yard was solid, with no way for anyone to slip through. It was impossible for them to have vanished that quickly. A cold sweat broke out on my neck as I stepped out into the yard, scanning every corner, but there was no sign of anyone. No footprints, no movement, nothing. I felt a growing sense of dread. Something was wrong with this house. I wasn't a superstitious person, but I'd been in enough houses to know when something didn't feel right. And this place felt all kinds of wrong. I quickly went back inside, locking the door behind me, and grabbed my things. I didn't want to be there anymore. Whatever was going on with the Davis house wasn't something I was equipped to handle. I was just a real estate agent, not some paranormal investigator. As I left, I glanced back one last time at the house. The curtains in the front window shifted, just slightly, like someone was watching me from inside. I tried to tell myself it was just the wind, but I couldn't shake the feeling that the house was aware, like it was waiting for something or someone. That night I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that figure standing in the backyard, motionless and silent. I kept replaying the events in my mind, trying to make sense of them. Maybe it was just some neighborhood prankster, or maybe my imagination had gotten the best of me. But deep down, I knew that wasn't the case. The next morning, I called my boss and told him I wasn't going back to the Davis house. I didn't give him the full story, just that something felt off about the place. He didn't push me for details, but I could tell he was disappointed. He had wanted me to figure out why the house wasn't selling, and I hadn't been able to. A week later, I got a call from him. Another agent had taken over the listing for the Davis house, and he wanted to give me a heads up on something strange that had happened. The new agent had gone to the house to show it to a potential buyer, and they had found the back door wide open. But that wasn't the strange part. When they checked the security footage from the doorbell camera, they saw something that made my blood run cold. At 3 a.m., the back door had opened on its own, and standing just outside, barely visible in the shadows of the backyard, was a figure. The same figure I had seen, but this time They were facing the house, watching. Now, if you're still awake, like the video and subscribe. But before you go to bed tonight, maybe check that your windows and doors are locked. Just in case. After I got off the phone with my boss, I couldn't shake the sense of dread that crept up my spine. The figure in the backyard, the one I had seen, wasn't just a figment of my imagination. I had convinced myself that I had been overtired, that it was a trick of the light or nerves from being alone in that creepy house. But now, with the new agent seeing the same thing, it was clear that whatever had happened wasn't just in my head. The fact that it showed up on the security footage made it worse. Something tangible, something real. I needed to see the video for myself. I called my boss back almost immediately. "Can you send me the footage?" I asked, trying to sound calm, though my voice had an edge of desperation to it. He hesitated, but then said, "Yeah, I'll get it to you by the end of the day. I wasn't sure if you wanted to see it, honestly." The new agent, Caroline, she was pretty spooked by it too. The thought of someone else experiencing that same eerie feeling made my skin crawl. This wasn't just some strange coincidence. Something was wrong with that house. True to his word, the footage landed in my inbox later that afternoon. I stared at the email for a long moment before finally clicking on it. The video opened, showing the empty front yard of the Davis house in grainy black and white night vision. The timestamp in the corner read, 2:57 a.m. For a while, nothing happened. The yard was still, the faint wind occasionally rustling the leaves of the tree near the street. It seemed almost peaceful. Then, at exactly 3:00 a.m., the screen flickered. The back door of the house creaked open slowly, almost deliberately, as if someone was opening it from the inside. But no one appeared on the camera. There was just the open door, swaying slightly in the breeze. For a second, nothing moved. And then I saw it. A figure stepped into the frame, appearing out of the shadows of the backyard. My breath caught in my throat. It was exactly as I remembered. Tall, with a long dark coat and unnaturally stiff posture. But this time, instead of facing away from the house like it had when I saw it, the figure was facing directly at the camera. I felt a chill run through me as I watched the figure stand perfectly still, staring straight ahead, as if it knew it was being watched. It was difficult to make out any details. Its face was shrouded in darkness, and the camera quality wasn't great. But I could see enough. I could see that its eyes, if it had any, were locked on the house. And then, without warning, the figure stepped forward, disappearing into the open doorway. I paused the video, my heart racing. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. The door had opened by itself, and whoever, or whatever, that figure was, it had entered the house. I sat back in my chair, trying to process what I had just seen. I rewound the footage, watching it again, hoping for some kind of rational explanation. But there wasn't one. The figure moved too deliberately, too human-like, and the way it entered the house felt purposeful, like it belonged there. I picked up the phone and called my boss again. "I need to go back to the house," I said, my voice shaky but resolute. "There's something wrong with that place." He hesitated. Look, I get that it's creepy, but Caroline already... I need to go back, I interrupted. I'm not trying to sell it. I need to know what's going on. There was a long pause on the other end before he finally said, All right, but take someone with you. I don't want you going alone. I promised him I would, though I wasn't sure who I could convince to come with me. Most of my friends weren't exactly thrilled by the idea of investigating creepy, potentially haunted houses. But there was one person who came to mind. That night, I called my friend Dan. He wasn't just a friend. He was a paranormal investigator. Or at least, he liked to think of himself as one. He ran a small YouTube channel dedicated to ghost hunting, and while I had always thought of it as a bit of a joke, I knew he'd be up for the challenge. Are you serious? He said, his voice practically buzzing with excitement when I told him the story. This is exactly the kind of thing I've been waiting for. I'm in. When are we going? Tomorrow morning, I said. First thing. The next morning, Dan and I drove out to the Davis house. He was practically giddy with excitement, his ghost hunting equipment in tow. I, on the other hand, felt a deep sense of dread settling in my stomach as we approached the house. It looked exactly as it had before. Immaculate, well-maintained, yet unnervingly still. When we pulled up, Dan immediately began setting up his cameras and audio recorders, chattering away about EVP sessions and thermal imaging. I let him do his thing, but all I could focus on was the house itself. It felt different today, heavier somehow, like the air around it was charged with something I couldn't explain. We entered the house, and the same stale, oppressive air greeted us. The furniture was still arranged perfectly, the kitchen spotless, but it felt wrong. It was too perfect, too still. I'll start in the living room, Dan said, setting up one of his cameras on a tripod. You want to check upstairs? I nodded, though the thought of going upstairs alone made my stomach turn. Still, I had to know if the figure was still here, if there was something, or someone, hiding in the house. As I climbed the stairs, the creaks beneath my feet felt louder than they had before, like the house was reacting to my presence. I made my way to the master bedroom, the place where I had first seen the figure in the yard. The window was closed this time, the curtains drawn, but as I stood there staring out at the empty backyard, I felt it again, that creeping sense of being watched. I turned around quickly, my eyes scanning the room. There was no one there. But then I heard it, a soft click, like the sound of a door closing. I stepped into the hallway, my heart pounding in my chest. The door to the guest bedroom was open, but I hadn't opened it. I slowly approached it, my hand trembling as I reached for the doorknob. The room was empty. But the closet door, that was ajar. I swallowed hard, stepping into the room, my eyes locked on the half-open closet door. The space beyond it was dark, the faint light from the window barely reaching inside. Every instinct screamed at me to leave, to go back downstairs and forget about the house. But I had to know. I reached for the closet door and swung it open. There was nothing inside. No clothes, no boxes, just an empty closet. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding, and stepped back, feeling like a fool for scaring myself over nothing. But then I noticed something. The floor of the closet, it wasn't solid. There was a hatch, a small wooden door built into the floorboards, barely visible unless you were looking for it. My stomach dropped. I had never seen this before. I knelt down and gently pulled at the hatch. It creaked open, revealing a narrow set of stairs leading down into darkness. A crawl space, a hidden basement. I hadn't seen any indication of this on the floor plans. "Dan!" I called out, my voice echoing through the house. "I found something." He came up the stairs, excitement written all over his face. "What is it?" I showed him the hatch, and his eyes lit up. "Oh man, this is perfect. Hidden rooms, secret passages. This is classic haunting material." I wasn't so sure. We descended the stairs together, Dan with his camera and flashlight, me with a growing sense of dread. The air down here was thick, damp, and smelled faintly of mold. The narrow staircase opened into a small, unfinished basement, a space that had clearly not been touched during the renovations. The concrete walls were bare, the floor cold underfoot. And in the far corner of the room, I saw it. A chair, a single wooden chair, sitting in the center of the room, facing the wall. I felt my skin prickle. It was the only piece of furniture in the entire basement, and it was positioned so perfectly, so deliberately, like someone had been sitting there, waiting for something, or someone. Dan approached the chair, his camera rolling, oblivious to the growing fear in my chest. "This is amazing," he whispered, as if we were in some sacred space. "There's definitely something here." But I wasn't listening to him anymore, because on the wall, just above the chair, were scratches. Deep, jagged scratches, like someone had been clawing at the concrete. My breath caught in my throat as I moved closer, my eyes tracing the lines. There was no pattern, just frantic, desperate marks. And then I saw the words, barely visible, etched into the wall in what looked like faded chalk. "I see you." I stared at the words on the wall, my skin crawling as I tried to make sense of it. "I see you," written in jagged, frantic lines, etched as if by someone who had no other way to communicate, like a last desperate attempt to leave a message before... What? Before they disappeared. Before the house took them. "Do you see this?" I whispered to Dan, my voice trembling. But I couldn't tear my eyes away from the wall. Dan was engrossed in his camera, filming the room, muttering something about how great the footage would be for his YouTube channel. He didn't notice the tension in my voice. "This is exactly the kind of thing we were hoping for," he said, moving the camera to focus on the words. Whoever was down here must have been losing their mind. I stood there, frozen, staring at the scratches. There were more than I'd first realized. Some of the marks were shallow, while others dug deep into the concrete, as though the person had been clawing at the wall with bare hands. The more I looked, the more I could see the desperation, the raw fear that had driven whoever it was to carve those words. And that's when I noticed something even more disturbing. The floor beneath the chair wasn't clean. There were faint, reddish-brown stains, stains that looked disturbingly like dried blood. My breath hitched in my throat. This wasn't some harmless hidden room. Something terrible had happened here. I could feel it in my bones. "Dan," I said again, my voice a little louder this time, more urgent. "We need to get out of here." But Dan was in his element, his excitement blinding him to the weight of the room, the oppressive air that was pressing down on us. He walked over to the chair, crouching down to examine the floor, completely oblivious to the unease that had settled over me like a heavy blanket. "What do you think?" he asked, his voice filled with glee as he filmed the stains. "Ritual sacrifice, some kind of occult activity." I shook my head, backing away from the wall. "I don't know, man, but this place feels wrong. We shouldn't be here." Dan stood up, still not fully understanding. "Come on, this is exactly what we were hoping for. This could be huge. We could be documenting a real haunting. Just think about the exposure." I felt a wave of nausea roll through me. This wasn't about exposure, not for me. This wasn't just some internet ghost story or a creepy house to explore. There was something alive in this place, something watching, something waiting. "I'm serious, Dan," I said, my voice more forceful now. "We need to leave. Right now." Dan sighed, clearly annoyed, but he saw the look on my face and must have realized I wasn't joking. "Fine," he said, shutting off his camera. "But you're going to regret not staying longer. There's something here, and we're just scratching the surface." I didn't care. I just wanted to get out. We made our way back up the narrow stairs, the air feeling heavier with each step, like the house itself didn't want us to leave. Every creak, every groan of the floorboards felt magnified, like the house was alive, listening, watching us as we tried to escape. When we reached the main floor, I let out a shaky breath, grateful to be out of that basement. The oppressive atmosphere seemed to ease, though the house was still eerily silent, its emptiness bearing down on me. But as we walked toward the front door, something stopped me. Cold. The door was open. I know for a fact that we had closed it when we came in, locking it behind us. But now, it was open, just slightly, barely enough to notice if you weren't looking for it. A thin crack of light from the outside filtered through, but the house's interior remained drenched in heavy shadows. Dan noticed too, his eyes narrowing. "Did you leave it open?" "No," I whispered, my heart beginning to pound again. "I didn't." He stepped toward the door, pushing it open fully, peering outside. The street was still quiet, the sun bright and ordinary. There was no one there, but the hairs on the back of my neck stood up, a primal warning deep inside, telling me something was off. "That's weird," Dan muttered, closing the door again. Maybe it didn't catch when we came in. I didn't believe him. I could still feel that strange, oppressive presence, like something or someone had been in the house with us the entire time, maybe even right behind us as we explored the basement. I was ready to leave, beyond ready. But then I heard it. A creak. It came from the second floor. Dan and I both froze, our eyes snapping upward toward the ceiling. There it was again. Slow, deliberate, like someone was pacing above us. "Is there someone else here?" Dan whispered, his excitement returning. But this time, I saw a flicker of doubt cross his face. "There shouldn't be," I said, my voice barely audible. "I checked everything when we got here." Dan grabbed his camera, his eyes gleaming. "Let's check it out." I wanted to tell him no. I wanted to run out the front door and never come back to this house again. But something stopped me. Maybe it was curiosity, maybe it was fear, maybe it was both. But whatever it was, I found myself following Dan up the stairs. The creaking continued, growing louder as we reached the top. The air was thick, suffocating, like the house was holding its breath, waiting for us to make a move. We stepped onto the landing, the hallway stretching out before us. The same hallway I had walked down when I first saw that figure in the backyard. But this time, there was something different. The door to the master bedroom was closed. I had left it open. I was sure of it. My heart was in my throat as we approached the door, each step feeling heavier than the last. Dan was ahead of me, his camera recording every moment, but I could see the tension in his shoulders. He wasn't as confident as he had been before. He reached for the doorknob and twisted it slowly. The door creaked open, revealing the master bedroom beyond. The window was open again, but that wasn't what made my blood turn cold. Sitting in the middle of the room, in front of the window, was the chair. The same chair we had seen in the basement. Dan froze, staring at the chair, his camera still rolling. What the hell? My breath caught in my throat. We had left that chair in the basement. There was no way it could have been moved, certainly not by either of us. The feeling of being watched returned, stronger than ever, and I felt a cold sweat break out on my skin. "Dan," I whispered, backing away. "We need to go. Now." But Dan was transfixed by the chair. He stepped closer, his camera zooming in on it. This is incredible," he muttered. "It's like the house is responding to us." I wanted to scream at him, to grab him and drag him out of the house. But before I could, something happened that made my heart stop. The chair moved. It didn't fall over. It didn't tip slightly. It slid across the floor toward the window with a slow, deliberate motion. The legs scraped against the hardwood, the sound deafening in the silence of the room. Dan stumbled back, his camera shaking in his hands. "Did you see that?" he gasped, his voice cracking with disbelief. "Did you see?" But before he could finish, the window slammed shut with a deafening bang, the glass rattling in its frame. That was it. I couldn't take it anymore. I grabbed Dan by the arm and yanked him toward the door. "We're leaving! Now!" For the first time, Dawn didn't argue. His face had gone pale, his excitement replaced by fear. We bolted down the stairs, not caring about the noise we made or the cameras we left behind. All that mattered was getting out of the house. When we reached the front door, I wrenched it open, the cool outside air hitting my face like a slap. We ran to the car, slamming the door shut behind us, our breaths coming in ragged gasps. Dan was shaking, his hands white-knuckled on the steering wheel as he started the engine. What the hell just happened in there? "I don't know," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. but I'm not going back. As we drove away from the Davis house, I glanced back one last time. And there, standing in the upstairs window, I saw it. The figure, watching us leave. I haven't been back to the Davis house since that day. I made sure to pass the listing off to someone else, though part of me wonders if anyone will ever be able to sell it. I don't know what's inside that house, if it's haunted, cursed, or something worse. But I do know this. Some places are meant to stay empty. If you're still awake, hit that like button and subscribe. And next time you walk into an empty house, make sure you're really alone. For weeks after that day, I couldn't stop thinking about the Davis house. I'd handed off the listing to another agent, Caroline, and told my boss I didn't want anything to do with it anymore. Officially, the story I gave was that the property just wasn't for me, that I was burned out on difficult houses and wanted a break. But the truth was darker than that. I was scared, really scared. No matter how many times I tried to rationalize what had happened, to explain away the strange figure, the moving chair, and the scratches in the basement, I couldn't. The more I thought about it, the more I felt like something was still following me, like whatever was inside that house wasn't done with me yet. Dan, of course, tried to ride the high of what we'd experienced. He released the footage on his YouTube channel, editing it into a dramatic ghost hunting video. He claimed that the Davis house was one of the most haunted places he'd ever investigated. But even he admitted that something about it felt different, like it wasn't just a spirit haunting the place, but something much more dangerous. His video got more views than any of his previous uploads, but I could tell by the way he acted that he wasn't as enthusiastic as he used to be. He was afraid too. After the video went live, I started getting messages from people who had seen it. Random internet strangers who claimed to know something about the paranormal, offering theories about what was going on in the house. Some said it was a poltergeist. Others suggested a residual haunting, energy left behind from something traumatic. But one message stood out from the rest. It came from an email I didn't recognize, with no subject line and no signature. The message was short, only a few sentences. "You are in danger. You've been marked by the house. Don't go back. If you do, you'll never leave." I stared at the email for a long time, my heart pounding. I couldn't shake the feeling that whoever had sent it knew something real. I had already made up my mind that I wasn't going back, but seeing those words written out, that warning, made my decision feel final. But that wasn't the last time I heard from the Davis house. A few weeks after Dan posted his video, I was sitting at home, trying to move on with my life. I'd managed to shake some of the lingering fear, telling myself that everything that happened at the house had some rational explanation. The figure we saw, the chair moving, there had to be some kind of trick to it. Maybe someone had been playing a cruel prank. I almost believed it. But then, one night, I got a call. It was late, after midnight, and my phone buzzed on the nightstand, dragging me out of sleep. Groggy, I reached for it and saw an unknown number on the screen. At first, I thought about ignoring it, but something about the timing felt wrong. I answered. "Hello?" There was silence on the other end. No static, no background noise. Just silence. "Hello?" I repeated, my heart beginning to race. And then I heard it. A soft creak, like the sound of floorboards shifting under the weight of someone moving. I froze, the phone pressed against my ear. The sound was faint, but unmistakable. And then came the second noise. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate footsteps, walking across a wooden floor. Just like the sounds I'd heard in the Davis house. I sat up in bed, my entire body tense, listening to the faint echo of those footsteps, wondering if someone had broken into my house, or worse, if something had followed me home. I glanced around the room, heart racing, expecting to see someone standing in the shadows, but there was no one. The footsteps continued on the phone, getting louder, as though whoever, or whatever, was walking closer to the phone's speaker. I opened my mouth to speak, but before I could say anything, the call ended. The line went dead. I stared at the screen, the word "disconnected" flashing on my phone. I didn't know what to do, what to think. Was it a prank? Or had the house, the thing inside the house, found a way to reach me, even though I'd stayed far away? The more I thought about it, the more I became convinced that it was the latter. The house wasn't just a place. It was a presence, a living entity that didn't need to be confined by walls or doors. It had followed me, and now it was trying to communicate. I didn't sleep the rest of that night. The next morning, I did the only thing I could think of. I called Dan. When I told him about the call, he sounded excited, though there was an edge of fear in his voice. He had been fielding strange messages and comments ever since he'd posted the video, but nothing like what I had experienced. "Dude, you should have recorded it," he said, his voice buzzing over the line. "It sounds like the house is reaching out. This could be huge for the channel." I wasn't interested in recording it. I just wanted it to stop. But Dan was obsessed with getting more evidence. He suggested going back to the house to try and communicate with whatever was inside. He wanted to set up more cameras, more equipment. He even talked about doing a live stream. "No," I said firmly. "I'm not going back." Dan tried to convince me otherwise, but I was adamant. I wasn't setting foot in that place again. I had seen enough, felt enough, to know that the house was dangerous. Whatever lived there didn't want to be investigated. It wanted something else. And I had a sinking feeling that if we kept pushing, kept trying to expose it, something worse would happen. Dan was disappointed, but he didn't push any further. He agreed to let it go, at least for the time being. But the calls didn't stop. Every night, around the same time, my phone would buzz with an unknown number. Every time, I would hear those same slow, deliberate footsteps, the same creak of floorboards. Sometimes the calls would last for a few seconds, sometimes for minutes. But the pattern was always the same. Silence, footsteps, and then the line would go dead. I stopped answering after a while, but the calls kept coming. I turned my phone off at night, but it didn't matter. I would wake up to missed calls, always around 3 a.m. It was like the house was reminding me that it was still there, waiting for me to return. And then, things started happening in my apartment. At first, it was small stuff. I'd hear creaks and groans in the middle of the night, the same sounds I'd heard in the house. Doors would be slightly ajar in the morning, even though I was sure I'd closed them. The air in my bedroom felt heavier, like something was pressing down on me while I slept. Then, one night, I woke up to find the window in my living room wide open. I never opened that window. I lived on the 5th floor, and the window was old, difficult to open. But there it was, wide open, letting in the cold night air. I checked my apartment for any signs of a break-in, but nothing was disturbed. It was as if the window had just opened itself. That's when I knew that whatever had followed me from the Davis house wasn't just a trick of the mind. It was real, and it was getting bolder. I was being haunted, not by a ghost, but by the presence of the house itself. I didn't know what to do. My boss had passed the listing on to someone else, and as far as I knew, Caroline was still showing the property to potential buyers. I debated telling her about what I'd experienced, but I didn't want to scare her, or worse, have her think I was losing it. But I couldn't shake the feeling that things were only going to get worse. The house had marked me, and now it was creeping further into my life, invading my space, my mind. Then, one day, Caroline called me. "Hey," she said, her voice shaky. "I need to ask you something. Did anything weird happen when you were dealing with the Davis house?" My blood ran cold. I tried to play it off. "What do you mean?" There was a long pause on the other end of the line, and then she said, "I went to show the house yesterday, and when I got there, the back door was wide open, and there was someone in the house." I felt a chill run down my spine. "What do you mean, someone?" Caroline's voice cracked. "I don't know. I thought it was one of the buyers, but they hadn't arrived yet." I walked into the living room, and there was a man standing in front of the window. He was facing away from me, just standing there. When I called out to him, he didn't move, and then he was gone. My stomach turned. "I don't think I can go back there," she continued, her voice trembling. "I'm sorry. There's something wrong with that house." I told her I understood. I didn't blame her. But the fact that it had happened again, another sighting, another strange presence, it solidified what I had feared all along. I know many of you use these videos to sleep, so before you drift off, like the video and subscribe. But tonight, I want to share something that's been on my mind. It's not just another spooky story. This one is different. This one is real. The Forgotten Trail. It started as an ordinary hike. I live for the outdoors, always have. There's something about the wilderness that makes me feel alive, connected to the earth in a way that cities never could. It's where I go to clear my head, where I go when life gets overwhelming. So when I heard about a remote hiking trail deep in the mountains, one that wasn't on any official maps, I was immediately intrigued. The trail was more of a local legend than a tourist destination. I first heard about it from an old man at a gear shop. He told me that only a handful of people knew about it, that it was hidden away in the thick forest, far off the beaten path. No one went there anymore, he said. Not since the 1980s. Why? I asked, genuinely curious. The old man just shrugged, his leathery face creasing into a smile. Some places are best left alone. I took it as local folklore, a story to keep tourists away from the more dangerous parts of the mountains. But something about the way he said it stuck with me. It felt like a challenge, like an invitation to discover something forgotten. So the next weekend, I packed my gear, grabbed my map and set out. The trail wasn't easy to find. I drove for nearly 3 hours into the mountains, past the popular hiking spots and campgrounds, until the roads turned to gravel. Eventually, even the gravel roads disappeared, leaving only rough dirt paths. The forest thickened around me, the trees pressing in like sentinels guarding some ancient secret. It was late afternoon by the time I parked my car at the edge of a dense tree line, where the map indicated the trailhead should be. There was no sign, no marker, nothing to suggest that anyone had been there in years. But as I pushed through the underbrush, I spotted it. A narrow, overgrown path, barely visible beneath layers of leaves and debris. This had to be it. For the first hour, the hike was uneventful. The trail wound deeper into the forest, climbing steadily up the mountain. The air was crisp, the scent of pine filling my lungs with each breath. The only sounds were the rustling of leaves and the occasional bird call. It was peaceful, exactly what I needed. But then, as the sun began to dip behind the mountains, I noticed something strange. The trail wasn't natural. I hadn't paid much attention at first, but now it was obvious. The path beneath my feet wasn't just worn by footsteps. It had been deliberately carved, the edges too clean, too precise. The trees lining the trail were all spaced evenly, their trunks thick and ancient, but too uniform, like they'd been planted in neat rows. I stopped, turning in a slow circle as I took in my surroundings. The forest felt off, too perfect, too controlled. The further I hiked, the more unnatural it seemed. And then I saw it. Just ahead, half hidden by the encroaching trees, was a clearing. At first, I thought it was a campsite, a flat open space in the middle of the forest. But as I got closer, I realized that it wasn't a campsite at all. It was a graveyard. There were no headstones, no markers. Just rows of small, unmarked mounds of earth, spaced evenly across the clearing. Each one was about the size of a human body. I felt a chill run down my spine as I approached the nearest mound. The dirt was freshly disturbed, as though it had been turned over recently, though there were no signs of shovels or digging tools. The other mounds looked the same, the soil loose and uneven, as if something had been buried there. But hastily, without care, I backed away, my mind racing. Who would bury bodies here, in the middle of nowhere? And why were the graves unmarked? As I stood there, staring at the mounds, I heard it. A whisper. At first, I thought it was the wind, just the breeze moving through the trees. But then the whisper came again, clearer this time. It wasn't just the rustling of leaves. It was a voice, a low, barely audible voice, coming from somewhere deep within the forest. I turned in a slow circle, my heart pounding in my chest. The voice was distant, but it seemed to be coming from all directions at once, surrounding me. Leave. The word was soft, almost pleading. It echoed through the trees, sending a shiver down my spine. I glanced around, expecting to see someone, anyone, standing among the trees. But there was no one. I backed away from the clearing, my skin crawling. The rational part of my brain told me to leave, to turn around and go back to the car, to forget about the trail and this weird, eerie clearing. But something stopped me. Curiosity, maybe, or something darker, more insistent. I kept walking. The trail continued past the clearing, winding deeper into the forest. The whispering grew fainter, but it never fully disappeared. It was always there, just on the edge of hearing, like a constant presence following me. And then, as I rounded a bend, I saw it. A cabin. It was small, tucked away among the trees, its wooden walls weathered and covered in moss. The windows were dark, but the door was slightly ajar, swaying gently in the breeze. It looked abandoned, like no one had set foot inside for years. But the whispering, faint but steady, seemed to be coming from the cabin itself. I hesitated, standing at the edge of the clearing, staring at the cabin. Every instinct screamed at me to turn back, to leave before whatever was inside made itself known. But something compelled me forward. I stepped toward the cabin. The closer I got, the more uneasy I felt. The air around me felt thick, heavy, as though the very atmosphere was pressing down on me. The whispering was louder now, though I still couldn't make out the words. It was a constant low hum, like 100 voices speaking in unison, but just beyond the edge of comprehension. My hand reached out, almost of its own accord, pushing the door open. The inside of the cabin was dark, the air stale and musty. It was empty, except for a single table in the center of the room and an old wooden chair. Dust coated every surface, undisturbed for what seemed like decades. I stepped inside, my heart pounding in my chest. The whispering grew louder, filling the room, though there was no visible source. It was everywhere and nowhere all at once, surrounding me, suffocating me. And then I saw it. On the table, there was a book. It was old, the leather cover cracked and faded with age. The pages were yellowed, the edges brittle. My hand trembled as I reached for it, flipping open the cover. The pages were filled with strange symbols, writing I didn't recognize, written in jagged, uneven lines. It wasn't in any language I had ever seen before. The symbols twisted and curled across the pages, almost like they were alive, writhing on the paper. As I stared at the writing, a deep, guttural voice echoed through the cabin. "You shouldn't have come here." I froze, my heart leaping into my throat. The voice wasn't a whisper anymore. It was loud, commanding, reverberating through the walls of the cabin. I spun around, expecting to see someone standing in the doorway, but there was no one, just the dark forest outside, the trees swaying gently in the breeze. The voice came again, louder this time. "You need to leave." I backed away from the table, my hands trembling. The air in the cabin felt thick, oppressive, like the walls were closing in on me. The whispering voices were growing louder now, rising to a fever pitch, surrounding me, pressing against my mind. I bolted for the door, my heart racing. I didn't care about the trail anymore, didn't care about the legend or the mystery of the cabin. I just needed to get out. As I ran through the forest, the whispering followed me, growing louder with each step. The trees seemed to close in around me, the path disappearing beneath my feet. My heart pounded in my chest, the cold air burning my lungs as I sprinted toward the car. I didn't look back. When I finally reached my car, I threw open the door and jumped inside, slamming it shut behind me. My hands were shaking as I started the engine, the whispering voices still echoing in my mind. I sped down the dirt road, not stopping until I was miles away from the forest, miles away from that forgotten trail. But even now, as I sit here, miles from that place, I can still hear it. The whispering, faint, but there, always there. And I know deep down that the trail isn't forgotten. It's waiting. If you're still awake, like the video and subscribe. But if you ever hear about a forgotten trail, hidden away in the woods, take my advice. Don't follow it. Some places are meant to stay lost. In the days after I fled the forgotten trail, life didn't quite return to normal. At first, I tried to rationalize the experience. I told myself it had been a mix of exhaustion, isolation, and my imagination getting the better of me. I'd been alone in the wilderness for hours, hiking through an unmarked trail. Anyone in my position could have experienced something similar. Paranoia, auditory hallucinations, maybe even a touch of hypothermia, causing my mind to play tricks. But the whispers didn't stop. They started faint, almost indistinguishable from background noise, like static in the quiet moments. I would hear them in the shower, in the stillness of my living room at night, or while walking to my car. They never lasted long, just a few seconds at a time, but enough to make me stop whatever I was doing and listen. Leave. It was always that same word, spoken softly, almost pleadingly, as if something was warning me of what was coming. But from what? What had I stumbled into that day in the woods? What had I disturbed? I tried talking to Dan, my best friend, who had joined me on countless hikes before. But when I mentioned the trail, the whispering, the grave-like mounds, his face paled, and he immediately shut down the conversation. "You shouldn't have gone there," he said quietly. I blinked, surprised by his sudden seriousness. "What are you talking about?" Dan avoided my gaze, fiddling with his phone. "I've heard of it, okay? I've never been, but people talk about that place sometimes. They say it's bad luck. I just didn't think you'd actually find it." I leaned forward, feeling a cold shiver run through me. "Why didn't you tell me about this before?" He finally met my eyes, and I could see the unease written on his face. "Because I didn't think it was real. I thought it was just a rumor, you know. One of those old campfire stories. But the people who've been there, they don't talk about it. And when they do, they say the same thing. Don't go back." He paused, his expression darkening. "And they all talk about the same thing. Whispers that follow you." I swallowed hard. "So you believe me?" Dan shrugged, uncomfortable. "I don't know, man. I believe something's messing with you. But it's not just the place. People who go there. They say it gets worse if you ignore it. The whispering, the dreams, the thing that follows you." His words chilled me to my core. I hadn't told Dan about the dreams yet, but I had been having them. Vivid nightmares that started the night after I came back from the trail. In the dreams, I'm always back at the clearing. It starts the same way each night. I'm standing at the edge of the forest, staring at the unmarked graves. The air is thick and still, and the forest around me feels oppressive, like it's watching me. The mounds of earth look more pronounced, as if they've been recently dug up and disturbed. I hear the whispering, louder this time, echoing all around me. Leave. But I can't move. My feet are rooted to the spot, as though the ground itself is holding me there. And then I see the figure. It always appears from behind the cabin, stepping slowly and deliberately toward me. The figure is tall, its body covered in tattered dark clothing that looks more like decayed skin than fabric. Its face is hidden in shadow, but I can feel its gaze, cold and piercing, locked on me. Every night, the figure comes closer. Every night, the whispers grow louder, more frantic, as if they're trying to warn me of something terrible. But I always wake up before the figure reaches me. After talking to Dan, I became hyper-aware of every sound, every flicker of shadow, wondering if it was real or just my mind unraveling. The whispers grew more persistent, following me everywhere, and the dream began to shift, becoming more vivid, more terrifying. But the worst part was the feeling that I wasn't alone anymore. At first, I'd brush it off as paranoia, but soon it became impossible to ignore. When I walked down the street, I could feel someone watching me. When I was at home, it felt like someone, or something, was standing just outside my field of vision. Always, just out of sight. The hairs on the back of my neck would rise whenever I turned a corner, only to find nothing there. But it didn't stop there. One evening, after another restless night filled with nightmares, I sat on my couch, scrolling mindlessly through my phone, trying to distract myself. It was late, around midnight, and the apartment was eerily quiet. The only light came from the TV casting a soft glow across the room. Then, the lights flickered. Just once. A quick, dim flash, like a power surge. I froze, my body tensing. I listened carefully, waiting for something, anything, to happen. The apartment felt too quiet, like the air itself was holding its breath. I glanced at the window, half expecting to see a shadow move across the curtains. And then I heard it, the familiar creak of floorboards, just like I'd heard outside the cabin. It came from the hallway, leading to my bedroom. Slow, deliberate footsteps, as though someone was walking through the apartment. My breath caught in my throat, and I felt my heart race. I knew I was alone. I had locked the door. No one should have been inside. The footsteps stopped. I stayed perfectly still, barely daring to breathe. The shadows in the hallway seemed to shift, darker than before. Then, from the darkness, I heard the whisper, "Leave." My skin prickled with fear, and my hands began to tremble. The voice was unmistakable. It wasn't in my head. It was here. I shot up from the couch, grabbing my phone and darting for the door. My hand shook as I fumbled with the lock, desperate to escape the apartment. The whispers grew louder, echoing in the hallway behind me, like a chorus of voices pleading with me to leave. I finally got the door open and ran outside into the cool night air. I didn't stop running until I was halfway down the street, my chest burning from the cold. When I finally turned around, I half expected to see the figure standing in my doorway. But there was nothing, just the silent, empty street. But I could still feel it, the presence lingering behind me, watching from the shadows. I knew then that running wouldn't help. The next day, I went back to the gear shop where I first heard about the trail. The old man was there again, sitting behind the counter, just as he had been when I first met him. He looked up when I entered, his eyes narrowing as if he knew why I had come back. "I warned you," he said, his voice gravelly. "Some places are best left alone." I walked up to the counter, trying to control the shaking in my hands. What's happening to me? How do I make it stop? The old man studied me for a long moment, then sighed. "You can't stop it. Once you've been marked, it doesn't let go, not until it gets what it wants." I swallowed hard, feeling the cold weight of his words settle in my chest. What does it want? He leaned forward, his voice low and ominous. "It wants you to go back." The thought sent a chill through me. There was no way I was going back to that trail, back to that clearing, back to the cabin. But deep down, I knew he was right. Whatever it was, whatever I had disturbed, wasn't going to leave me alone. "You have two choices," the old man continued. "You can keep running, but it'll follow you. It always follows. Or you can go back and face it." "Face what?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. The old man's eyes darkened. "Whatever's buried there, whatever's waiting." For days, I wrestled with the decision. The whispering continued, the dreams grew more vivid, and the figure in the dreams came closer and closer each night. I could feel its presence now, even when I was awake, lurking just out of sight, watching, waiting for me to return. I knew that running wasn't an option anymore. The only way to end it was to go back. So I packed my gear, just as I had before, and made the long drive back into the mountains. The road was just as rough and overgrown as it had been the first time, but now it felt even more desolate, as though the forest itself knew I was coming back. When I reached the tree line, the same sense of dread washed over me. The forgotten trail was just as I had left it, hidden and overgrown. But now I knew what lay ahead. I walked the trail in silence, my heart pounding in my chest, the whispering voices growing louder with each step. The trees pressed in around me, their branches reaching out like skeletal hands. The air was thick, suffocating, as though the forest itself was alive and watching my every move. When I reached the clearing, I stopped. The mounds were still there, undisturbed. The mounds were still there, undisturbed, just as I had left them. But this time, they seemed even more prominent, as if the earth had shifted around them. The air in the clearing felt thicker, heavier, like it was charged with something dark and ancient. The trees surrounding the clearing seemed to lean in closer, their branches twisted and gnarled, casting long, distorted shadows across the ground. I stood at the edge of the clearing, my heart racing, the whispering voices filling my ears. They were louder now, more insistent, like they were trying to warn me, or maybe trying to push me forward. I couldn't tell anymore. My mind was spinning, and every fiber of my being screamed at me to turn around and leave. But I didn't. I couldn't. I knew that whatever had followed me, whatever had marked me, wouldn't stop until I confronted it. I took a deep breath, my legs trembling, and stepped forward into the clearing. The moment my foot touched the earth, the whispering stopped. The silence was deafening. It was as if the entire forest had gone mute. No birds, no rustling leaves, just an oppressive, eerie stillness that pressed down on me like a weight. My breath came in shallow gasps as I moved further into the clearing, my eyes darting between the unmarked mounds. That's when I saw it again. The cabin. It was exactly as I remembered, tucked away at the edge of the clearing, its walls dark and weathered, the door hanging slightly ajar. My heart pounded in my chest as I stared at it, a cold sweat breaking out on my skin. The last time I had been here, the whispers had come from inside that cabin, and now I was being drawn back to it. With every step, the air around me seemed to thicken, as if something was closing in. The trees loomed like sentinels, their branches twisting unnaturally in the fading light. The cabin stood silent, waiting, its door creaking softly in the breeze. I approached the cabin slowly, each step feeling heavier than the last. My hands were trembling, my breath shaky. I reached the door, the faint smell of decay wafting from within. I hesitated, my fingers brushing against the old wood. Everything inside me screamed to turn back, to leave before it was too late. But I pushed the door open. The room inside was just as it had been before, dark, musty, and empty, save for that same wooden table and chair. The book was still there, lying open on the table, its pages filled with those strange, writhing symbols. But something was different. The air inside the cabin was suffocating now, thick with an energy I couldn't explain. The temperature had dropped sharply, the cold biting at my skin. My breath came out in clouds of mist, though it wasn't winter. I stepped inside, my footsteps echoing hollowly on the wooden floor. The whispers had returned, faint at first, but growing louder with each passing second. They seemed to be coming from all around me, circling the room like a swirling storm of voices. But one voice, the same deep, guttural voice from before, rose above the others. "You shouldn't have come back." The voice was louder this time, more distinct, and it wasn't just in my head. It was real, echoing through the cabin, vibrating in the very walls. I spun around, expecting to see someone standing behind me, but the room was empty. I backed toward the table, my eyes scanning the shadows, searching for any sign of movement. The whispers grew louder, more frantic, as if they were building towards something. My eyes fell on the book, and for a brief moment I thought I saw the symbols on the page shift, moving ever so slightly. Then I felt it, a presence behind me, cold, dark, and suffocating. I turned slowly, my heart hammering in my chest. And there, standing in the doorway, was the figure. It was the same figure I had seen in my nightmares, the same one that had followed me. Its tall, gaunt form was covered in tattered, dark clothing that seemed to blend with the shadows. Its face was obscured, hidden beneath the hood of a cloak, but I could feel its gaze locked on me. Cold, empty, and full of malice. The air in the room thickened, and I felt an overwhelming pressure bearing down on me, making it hard to breathe. My body froze, every muscle locking in place, as though the figure's presence had taken control of me. I wanted to run, to scream, to do anything, but I couldn't move. The figure stepped forward, its movements slow and deliberate. It didn't speak, but the whispers grew louder, more frantic, filling the room with their desperate energy. I could feel the weight of the figure's gaze, like it was pulling something out of me, draining me. And then, the figure raised its hand. At first, I thought it was going to reach for me, but instead, it pointed toward the mounds outside the cabin, the graves I had seen on my first visit. "Leave," the whispering voices said again, more insistent this time. I glanced toward the mounds, my heart racing, and I realized with a sickening certainty what the figure wanted. The graves weren't just random resting places. They weren't abandoned. They were waiting. And if I didn't leave now, one of them would be mine. The figure took another step forward, and suddenly, my legs unlocked. Without thinking, I bolted for the door, my heart pounding in my ears. I could hear the whispers behind me, louder now, almost shouting as I sprinted across the clearing toward the trail. The cold air burned my lungs, and the forest seemed to blur around me as I ran. I didn't stop until I reached my car. When I finally looked back, the trail was gone. I never went back to the forgotten trail. I told Dan what had happened, and he insisted on going back himself, to film it, to try and capture proof of whatever had followed me. But I begged him not to. I told him what I had seen, what the whispers had said. Some places are meant to stay lost. For weeks, the whispering followed me. Every night, I would hear the faint echo of voices just outside my window, urging me to leave, warning me not to come back. The dreams continued, but the figure never reached me again. I could feel its presence, though, watching me, waiting for me to slip up and return. The nightmares have faded now, and the whispers are quieter, almost gone. But sometimes, when the house is quiet and the night is still, I can hear them again just on the edge of my hearing. Leave. It's a reminder, a warning. And I know, no matter how much time passes, that the forgotten trail is still there, waiting for someone else to find it, waiting for its next victim. But I'll never go back. Some trails are meant to be forgotten. If you've made it this far, thank you for listening. Like the video and subscribe. And please, if you ever hear about a hidden, forgotten trail in the woods, take my advice and stay far, far away. Some places are lost for a reason. The days turned into weeks, and though the whispers had faded, they never truly disappeared. I had stopped hearing them in the middle of the night, but now they came in other ways, during quiet moments, in the background of normal life. It wasn't constant, but it was enough to remind me that the trail was still there, somewhere, waiting for me to make a mistake. I avoided talking about it. I avoided thinking about it too. But it was impossible to completely forget. The whispers would come at the most unexpected times, when I was doing laundry, taking a shower, or driving to work. They were subtle, barely noticeable, but they always said the same thing: leave. The dreams hadn't stopped either. Every few nights I'd wake up in a cold sweat, my heart racing, my mind filled with the image of the mounds, the cabin, and the figure. The figure was always there, standing in the clearing, watching me from the shadows. It never moved, it never spoke, but it was always there, waiting. One night, after yet another restless sleep filled with nightmares, I woke up to a sound in my apartment. I was groggy at first, my mind fogged by sleep, but I quickly realized what I was hearing. Footsteps. Soft, deliberate footsteps coming from the hallway just outside my bedroom. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. The sound was unmistakable, the slow creak of floorboards beneath someone's weight. My heart raced as I stared at the closed bedroom door, half expecting it to swing open at any moment. I thought about calling out, but something inside me, something primal, told me to stay silent. The footsteps grew closer, stopping just outside the door. For what felt like an eternity, I lay there holding my breath, my body tense with fear. I couldn't hear anything now, just the suffocating silence of my apartment, but I knew, deep down, that I wasn't alone. Suddenly, the door handle turned. It didn't open, not fully, but the handle twisted slowly, deliberately, as if someone was testing it, waiting for the right moment to push the door open. I felt a cold sweat break out on my skin. My heart was pounding so hard, I thought it might explode from my chest. Every muscle in my body was locked, my mind screaming at me to run, to do something, anything. But I couldn't move. The handle stopped turning. And then, after a long, agonizing moment, the footsteps began again. They moved away from the door, back down the hallway, fading into the distance until they were gone. I lay there for hours, too terrified to move. When I finally mustered the courage to check the apartment, everything was as it should be. The door was locked, the windows were closed. There was no sign that anyone, or anything, had been inside. But I knew it had been there. I could feel its presence lingering, the air still thick with the cold, suffocating energy I had felt back at the trail. I started sleeping with the lights on after that. The dreams became more vivid, more terrifying, as if the presence that had followed me from the trail was growing stronger. The figure in the dreams wasn't just watching me anymore. It was moving closer. Each time, it would take one step closer to me, its hooded face still obscured, but its cold, dark energy pressing down on me like a weight. I knew it was only a matter of time before it reached me. I tried to push it all out of my mind. I told myself I was being paranoid, that the dreams were just a product of my fear, my imagination playing tricks on me. But deep down, I knew that wasn't true. The trail had marked me. The presence that followed me wasn't just a figment of my mind. It was real, and it wasn't done with me yet. A few weeks later, I got a call from Dan. I hadn't heard from him in a while. Ever since I warned him not to go back to the trail, he'd stayed quiet, probably respecting my need for space. But this time, his voice sounded different. Tense, worried. "I need to talk to you," he said, his voice low and serious. "What's going on?" I asked, already feeling a knot of anxiety tighten in my stomach. "It's about the trail," he said, pausing as if he was trying to find the right words. I went back. My heart dropped. "Dan, I told you not to go back." "I know," he interrupted, his voice strained. "But I had to. After everything you told me, I couldn't stop thinking about it. I thought maybe there was something more to it, something we didn't see the first time. But it's worse than I thought. Much worse." I swallowed hard, my mind racing. "What do you mean?" Dan let out a shaky breath. "I brought my camera this time. I wanted to document it. At first, everything seemed normal, just like before. But when I got to the clearing, there was something new." I felt a chill run down my spine. "What do you mean, something new?" Dan's voice wavered. There was another mound, fresh, like something had been buried there recently. But that's not the worst part. When I got closer, I saw it. Your name. It was written in the dirt, on top of the mound. My blood turned to ice. "It's like it's waiting for you," Dan continued, his voice shaking. "Like the trail knows you're not done with it yet. I don't know how, but it knows." I couldn't breathe. My mind was spinning, my body cold with fear. The whispers, the dreams, the figure, it had all been leading to this. "I think you need to go back," Dan said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know what's going on, but whatever it is, it's not going to stop until you do." I hung up the phone, my hands trembling. I didn't want to go back. I didn't want to face whatever was waiting for me. But I knew, deep down, that I didn't have a choice. The trail had marked me. It was calling me back. And if I didn't go, it would come for me. The next day, I packed my gear and made the drive back to the mountains. The road felt longer this time, more desolate, as if the forest was preparing for my return. The trees seemed darker, the sky more overcast, casting long shadows across the landscape. The air felt heavy, oppressive, like the weight of the trail itself was pressing down on me. When I reached the tree line, I stopped for a moment, staring at the entrance to the forgotten trail. It looked the same as it always had, overgrown and hidden, as though it had been waiting for me this whole time. I took a deep breath, steeling myself, and stepped onto the trail. The walk felt different this time. The trees seemed to close in tighter around me, their branches reaching out like skeletal fingers. The whispering returned almost immediately, louder than before, surrounding me with that same haunting message. Leave. But this time, I couldn't. I was here to end it. When I reached the clearing, my heart stopped. Dan had been right. There was a new mound in the middle of the clearing, its dirt freshly disturbed, as if something had been buried there recently. And there, written in the dirt, was my name. The sight of it made my blood run cold. The presence I had felt before was stronger now, more oppressive, like the very air in the clearing was alive with malevolent energy. The trees loomed overhead, their branches twisted and gnarled, casting long, dark shadows across the ground. I felt a cold sweat break out on my skin as I approached the mound, my legs trembling with fear. The whispers were louder now, almost frantic, as if they were trying to warn me, trying to stop me from doing what I was about to do. But I couldn't turn back. The cabin stood at the edge of the clearing, its door wide open, waiting for me. I approached the cabin, my heart pounding in my chest. The air inside was cold, thick with the same suffocating energy I had felt before. The book was still on the table, its pages filled with those strange, writhing symbols. But this time, something was different. The chair, the same one that had been empty the last time I was here, was occupied, and sitting in it was the figure. It didn't move, didn't speak. It just sat there, its hooded face turned toward me, its cold, empty gaze locked onto mine. The whispers stopped. For a long moment, I stood there frozen in place, my body trembling with fear. I knew, deep down, that I was standing on the edge of something terrible, something I couldn't fully comprehend. The figure wasn't just part of the trail. It was the trail. It was the presence that had followed me, the force that had marked me. And now it was waiting for me to make my move. I swallowed hard, my throat dry, and stepped forward. The figure remained motionless, its hooded face still obscured, its presence cold and oppressive. I didn't know what to do, what to say.